The setting sun cast long shadows across Willow Creek Ranch, painting the weathered barn in shades of amber and crimson. Eleanor Walsh stood motionless at the edge of her property, a Winchester rifle gripped tightly in her gloved hands. The evening breeze gently lifted the edge of the scarf that partially concealed the scarred half of her face, a permanent reminder of the night that had taken everything from her. 3 riders approached from the eastern ridge, dust clouds billowing behind. To them, they weren't bothering to hide their approach, and that worried Ellie more than anything else. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. "Mrs. Walsh," called the lead rider, his voice carrying across the open yard. "Got a message from Mr. Blackwood." Ellie didn't respond, but her finger moved imperceptibly closer to the trigger. Victor Blackwood had been sending messages for months now, first offers, then suggestions, and finally threats. This would be something worse, she knew. The rider, a thin man with a pockmarked face, pulled a folded document from his coat. "Says here you've got 3 days to clear out. The territorial office has reviewed your claim." His smile revealed a row of tobacco-stained teeth. "Seems there's been some irregularities with your water rights." Ellie felt her stomach tighten. Water rights were everything in Cottonwood Valley, especially with the drought stretching into its 2nd year. Without legal access to Eagle Creek, her cattle wouldn't last a week. "My rights are perfectly legitimate," she said, her voice steady, despite the fear crawling up her spine. "Checked and approved by Judge Morrison himself last spring." The rider's smile didn't falter. "Funny thing about paperwork, Mrs. Walsh, it has a way of changing." Behind him, the other 2 men spread out slightly, a subtle movement that Ellie recognized instantly as a tactical position. These weren't just messengers, they were positioning for violence. 3 days, the man repeated, tucking the document back into his coat. "Mr. Blackwood's being generous considering." As they turned to leave, the rider called back over his shoulder, "Shame about those burns, ma'am. Another fire would be awful tragic." Ellie stood motionless until the riders disappeared over the ridge, her scarred face revealing nothing of the calculations running through her mind. These men had no idea who they were threatening. They saw only a scarred widow, struggling to hold on to a failing ranch. They didn't know that Eleanor Walsh had been born Eleanor Callahan, daughter of Mad Mick Callahan, the most feared bounty hunter west of the Mississippi. What Victor Blackwood and his men didn't realize was that they weren't dealing with a helpless widow. They were about to awaken something that had been sleeping in Cottonwood Valley for 7 long years. The drought had been hard on Redemption Springs. What had once been a bustling town now seemed to wilt under the relentless sun. Its wooden structures faded and its citizens increasingly desperate. Eleanor Walsh, Ellie to the few who earned her trust, guided her wagon down the dusty main street, nodding politely to those who greeted her. Most people in town treated her with a strange mixture of pity and discomfort, their eyes inevitably drawn to the right side of her face before quickly looking away. The scarring wasn't as bad as most imagined beneath her carefully arranged scarf, but the story behind it had grown to mythic proportions in the 3 years since the fire that claimed her husband's life. Some whispered it was an accident, others that it was Blackwood's doing. Few knew the truth, and Ellie preferred it that way. She tied her horses outside Martha Winter's general store, adjusting her scarf before stepping inside. The bell above the door announced her arrival, and Martha's weathered face brightened at the sight of her. "Ellie, wasn't expecting you until next week," Martha said, setting aside the inventory ledger she'd been reviewing. "Things have changed," Ellie replied quietly. "Blackwood's made another move. His men came by yesterday with papers, claiming there are problems with my water rights." Martha's expression darkened. "That snake. Judge Morrison signed off on those rights himself." Paperwork has a way of changing, apparently. Ellie moved closer to the counter, lowering her voice. I need to send a telegram, Martha. A private one. Something in Ellie's tone made Martha study her more carefully. In the 7 years she'd known the young widow, she'd never seen such resolution in her eyes. You know Thomas at the telegraph office gossips worse than the church ladies, Martha warned. That's why I'm asking you, Ellie replied. You still have that direct line to Silver City in your back room? Martha nodded slowly, realization dawning. Who are you contacting, Ellie? Ellie hesitated, the name feeling strange on her lips after so many years. Michael Callahan, in Tucson. Martha's eyes widened. Everyone in the territory had heard of Mad Mick Callahan, the bounty hunter whose name made even the most hardened outlaws think twice about their life choices. Rumors of his exploits had reached almost mythic proportions. How he'd tracked the Coleman gang through a blizzard for 17 days. How he'd brought in the Sanderson brothers single-handedly when the army couldn't. Your father, Martha whispered, the pieces finally connecting. All this time, I never made the connection between Eleanor Walsh and the Callahans. That was the idea, Ellie admitted. When I married John, I left that life behind. My father didn't approve of a bounty hunter's daughter marrying a simple rancher. Her hand unconsciously touched the scarred side of her face. But things are different now. Martha nodded gravely and led Ellie to the back room where a small telegraph key sat on a cluttered desk. What's the message? Ellie considered for a moment before answering. Just 3 words. Eleanor needs you. As Martha tapped out the message, Ellie gazed out the small window at the parched landscape beyond. 7 years ago, she'd walked away from her father's violent world, determined to build something peaceful, with John. For a time, they'd succeeded. Willow Creek Ranch had thrived under their care, becoming one of the most productive cattle operations in the valley. Then came the drought, and with it, Victor Blackwood. The silver deposits discovered beneath Cottonwood Valley had transformed him from a small-time mine owner to the region's most powerful man almost overnight. One by one, the surrounding ranches had sold to Blackwood's mining operation. Some willingly, others after mysterious accidents befell them. John had refused to sell, even as their neighbors capitulated. This land isn't just dirt and grass, he'd told her. It's our future, our legacy. 2 weeks later, Ellie awoke to flames, engulfing their bedroom. She'd survived barely. John hadn't. The official report called it an accident, a knocked-over lantern. Sheriff Porter had conducted a cursory investigation before declaring the matter closed. The same Sheriff Porter who now wore a gold watch that matched the one on Blackwood's wrist. After the fire, Blackwood had been the first to visit, offering his condolences and a generous price for the ranch, less than half its value. Ellie had refused, struggling to keep the operation afloat with the help of Javier Mendoza, their foreman, and young Danny Cooper, whose family had worked Cottonwood Valley for generations. But now, with her water rights threatened, Ellie knew she was running out of options. Blackwood wasn't just trying to buy her land anymore. He was taking it, using his influence over territorial officials to rewrite the very laws that protected her claim. Message sent, Martha announced, breaking Ellie's reverie. Thank you, Ellie replied, reaching for her purse. Martha waved her off. Your money's no good for this. But Ellie, she added, her voice dropping, are you sure about contacting your father? The stories they tell about Mad Mick are mostly true, Ellie finished for her. That's exactly why I need him now. As Ellie prepared to leave, Martha pressed a small package into her hands. Danny stopped by earlier, left this for you, said it was urgent. Unwrapping the package, Ellie found a small glass vial filled with cloudy water and a hastily scrawled note. Found this in Eagle Creek this morning. Someone's poisoning the water upstream. A cold fury settled in Ellie's chest. Poisoning the water wasn't just an attack on her ranch, it threatened every living thing downstream, including the Navajo settlement that relied on Eagle Creek for their crops and livestock. "Blackwood's getting desperate," Martha observed, examining the vial. "Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." "Or confident," Ellie countered. "He thinks he's already won." Returning to her wagon, Ellie felt a strange sense of calm settling over her. For 7 years, she'd tried to escape her father's world, the strategic thinking, the constant vigilance, the understanding that power came through controlling not just weapons but knowledge. She'd buried those lessons beneath the peaceful life she'd built with John. Now, as she guided her horses back toward Willow Creek Ranch, Ellie felt those old instincts awakening. The daughter of Mad Mick Callahan hadn't just learned how to shoot straight and track a man across impossible terrain. She'd learned how to think 3 moves ahead, how to use an enemy's assumptions against them, and how to turn seemingly insurmountable odds into advantages. Victor Blackwood saw a vulnerable widow with a scarred face and a failing ranch. He had no idea he was dealing with the woman who had once been known as Red Callahan, so named for the trail of blood she and her father had left while bringing justice to the lawless territories. As Ellie crested the rise overlooking Willow Creek Ranch, she noticed a plume of dust on the northern horizon, riders approaching fast, too many for another warning from Blackwood. This looked like something else entirely. "Mrs. Walsh!" Danny Cooper's urgent voice carried across the yard as he raced to meet her wagon. The 17-year-old's face was flushed with exertion. "Riders coming, at least 8 of them." Ellie nodded calmly, climbing down from the wagon. "I see them. Get Javier, tell him to meet me at the house. And Danny," she added, her voice taking on an edge the boy had never heard before, "bring my husband's rifle, the Winchester." As Danny hurried off, Ellie walked purposefully toward the small ranch house. Behind a loose board in the root cellar, a hiding place John had never known about, lay a metal box she hadn't opened in 7 years. Inside was a reminder of the woman she'd been before becoming Eleanor Walsh. A custom Colt revolver with a pearl handle, its barrel inscribed with a single word, justice. For 7 years, she'd chosen peace, but as the dust cloud grew larger on the horizon, Eleanor Callahan Walsh knew that choice was no longer hers to make. Blackwood and his men were coming, not with offers or threats, but with violence. What they didn't realize was that violence had been her first language long before she'd learned the gentle cadences of ranching life. The approaching riders slowed as they reached the lower pasture, spreading out in a pattern that Ellie recognized immediately, a tactical approach designed to cover all angles. These weren't just Blackwood's usual messengers. These were professional gunmen. Javier Mendoza appeared at her side, his weathered face grim as he handed her a pair of binoculars. "I count 9, he said quietly, "and that's Snake Eyes Harmon leading them." Samuel Snake Eyes. Harmon had a reputation throughout the territory, a former cavalry scout turned hired gun who'd left a trail of bodies from Texas to California. His presence confirmed what Ellie already suspected. Blackwood wasn't interested in negotiations anymore. "Get the horses ready," she told Javier. "If things go badly, you and Danny head for Hawk's trading post. He'll get word to Silver City." Javier's expression hardened. "We're not leaving you, Mrs. Walsh." "This isn't your fight," Ellie insisted. "With respect," Javier replied. "It became my fight when they poisoned water that feeds my people downstream. The foreman had family in the Navajo settlement that relied on Eagle Creek. Besides," he added with a tight smile, "my father always said only a fool abandons a Callahan in a fight." Ellie's head snapped up. "You know?" Javier nodded. "My father rode with your father once, years ago. Recognized you the moment John brought you home, but it wasn't my place to say anything." The revelation stunned Ellie, but there was no time to process it. Danny arrived with the Winchester, his young face a mixture of fear and determination. "They're almost here," he reported. Ellie checked the rifle, then positioned herself on the porch, deliberately visible. Javier and Danny took less obvious positions. Javier near the barn door, Danny by the water trough, both armed. As the riders approached the main yard, Ellie recognized Snake Eyes Harmon immediately. A tall, lean man with a distinctive scar running through his left eyebrow and across his cheek, giving one eye a permanent squint that had earned him his nickname. "Mrs. Walsh," Harmon called out, his voice deceptively cordial. "Mr. Blackwood sends his regards." "Seems like a lot of men just to deliver regards," Ellie replied evenly, the Winchester resting casually in her arms. Harmon's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Blackwood is concerned about your safety, what with all the unfortunate accidents befalling stubborn ranchers lately." The threat hung in the air between them. "He's prepared to increase his offer, $5,000 for the property. Given the condition of your operation, that's more than generous." "My answer hasn't changed since yesterday," Ellie said. "This land isn't for sale." Harmon sighed theatrically. "That's unfortunate. See, we've discovered some interesting things about Eagle Creek." He gestured to one of his men who produced a document. "Territorial surveyors found the creek has been rerouted artificially, a violation of water rights law that carries serious penalties." It was a blatant lie. Eagle Creek had flowed through Willow Creek Ranch for generations. But Ellie recognized the strategy. Blackwood wasn't just trying to buy her land, he was manufacturing legal grounds to seize it. "Any surveyor worth his salt knows Eagle Creek's course hasn't changed in 50 years, Ellie challenged. "Funny thing about surveyors," Harmon replied, echoing the messenger from the day before, "their findings have a way of changing, especially when they're appointed by Mr. Blackwood's good friend, Judge Wilson." One of Harmon's men shifted in his saddle, his hand moving subtly toward his holster. Ellie noted the movement without seeming to, her mind automatically calculating angles and distances. 7 years away from her father's world hadn't dulled her instincts. "I'm giving you one chance," Harmon continued, his pretense of cordiality evaporating. "Clear out by sundown tomorrow, or we'll consider these water violations an act of theft against the territorial authority." His hand rested deliberately on his gun, "and we're authorized to deal with thieves permanently." Ellie's expression remained neutral, betraying nothing of the fury building inside her. "You should know something, Mr. Harmon," she said quietly. "My husband believed in peace, in building something instead of destroying it." Her eyes met his, and something in her gaze made Harmon's confidence waver momentarily. "I wasn't always so inclined." A flicker of uncertainty crossed Harmon's face. Something in her stance, her tone, had triggered a warning in the experienced gunman's mind. But he recovered quickly, his expression hardening. "Sundown tomorrow," he repeated. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." As Harmon and his men turned to leave, Ellie called after them, "Give Mr. Blackwood a message from me." She waited until Harmon turned back. "Tell him Eleanor Callahan sends her regards." The effect was immediate. Several of the riders exchanged glances, and even Harmon couldn't completely hide his surprise. The name Callahan carried weight throughout the territories. Weight and fear. Without another word, Harmon led his men away, but Ellie could see the tension in their postures. The simple revelation of her true identity had changed the equation. "That may have been unwise," Javier said quietly, coming to stand beside her, as the riders disappeared over the ridge. "Maybe," Ellie conceded, "but they needed to understand this won't be as easy as they thought." "Callahan?" Danny asked, his young face confused. "Like the bounty hunter?" "My father," Ellie confirmed, her eyes still fixed on the horizon where Harmon's men had vanished. And now they know exactly who they're dealing with. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, casting long shadows across Willow Creek Ranch, Ellie knew she'd just changed the rules of the game. Blackwood and his men had been preparing to deal with a vulnerable widow. Instead, they would now have to contend with the daughter of Mad Mick Callahan. But revealing her identity was only the first move in a much larger strategy. If her telegram reached her father in time, Blackwood would soon discover that threatening a Callahan never ended well for anyone foolish enough to try. The evening brought an unexpected visitor to Willow Creek Ranch. Ellie was checking the barn when she heard the approach of a single rider, not from the direction of town, but from the rugged hills to the west, where few travelers ventured. Her hand moved instinctively to the colt at her hip as she stepped into the yard, positioning herself with clear sightlines in all directions. The fading light revealed a solitary figure on horseback, moving with the easy grace of someone born to the saddle. "That's close enough," Ellie called when the rider was about 50 yards out. The man reined his horse to a stop, raising his hands slightly to show he meant no harm. "I hear someone's looking for trouble with a Callahan," he called back, his voice carrying a hint of amusement. "Thought I might offer my services." Ellie felt her breath catch. Not her father. The voice was all wrong. Younger, but someone who clearly knew the Callahan name. "Show your face," she demanded, the colt steady in her hand. The rider nudged his horse forward into a patch of moonlight, removing his hat as he did so. He was younger than Ellie had expected, perhaps 30, with dark hair and the kind of face that spoke of hard living. A scar ran along his jawline, and his eyes held the watchful alertness of a man accustomed to danger. But it was the badge, pinned to his vest, that caught Ellie's attention. Not a sheriff's star, but the distinctive shield of a U.S. Marshal. "Deputy Marshal Wesley Parker," he introduced himself, "though some folks know me by a different name." Recognition dawned. Slowly. "The Ghost Rider," Ellie said, lowering her gun slightly, but not holstering it. The Ghost Rider was infamous throughout the territories, an outlaw who'd mysteriously disappeared 3 years ago after a bloody confrontation with the Reeves gang. "That was a lifetime ago," Parker replied, his expression guarded. "These days, I ride for the law." "What brings a U.S. Marshal to my ranch at this hour?" Ellie asked, suspicion evident in her tone. Parker dismounted, moving with a slight favoring of his left leg. "An old injury," Ellie guessed. "Your father and I have history," he explained. "When word reached me that Eleanor Callahan had resurfaced and was facing trouble with Victor Blackwood, I thought I should investigate. My telegram only went out this morning," Ellie noted, her suspicion deepening. "How did you hear so quickly?" A ghost of a smile touched Parker's lips. "Your father isn't the only one with connections. Besides," he added, "Blackwood's operation has been on our radar for months. We just haven't had enough evidence to move against him." Ellie studied the Marshal carefully. There was something he wasn't saying, something personal in his interest. "And now you ride in alone, without backup or official orders." "Let's just say this visit isn't entirely official," Parker admitted. "Blackwood has friends in high places, including the territorial governor. Any official investigation gets shut down before it starts." Understanding dawned. "So you're here, unofficially?" Parker nodded. "Blackwood's not just after your water rights, Mrs. Walsh. He's building something bigger. A network of mines and railways that would give him control of every resource in 3 territories. Your ranch is just one piece of a much larger puzzle." Ellie finally holstered her weapon, though her wariness remained. "Come inside, Marshal. Seems we have a lot to discuss." In the small ranch house, Ellie lit a lamp, while Parker studied the room with the careful attention of a man who never fully relaxed. His gaze lingered on the photographs on the mantel, Ellie and John on their wedding day, their faces young and hopeful. "Your husband?" he asked. Ellie nodded, the familiar ache of loss pressing against her chest. "John Walsh, he died in the fire." She touched the scarred side of her face unconsciously. "The fire that Blackwood's men set, though no one can prove it." "I'm sorry," Parker said, and something in his tone suggested he understood loss intimately. "How much do you know about what Blackwood's really doing in Cottonwood Valley?" "I know he's buying, or taking, every ranch that controls water access," Ellie replied. "At first I thought it was just about the silver deposits, but there's more to it, isn't there?" Parker nodded grimly. "The silver's real, but it's just the beginning. Blackwood secured financing from Eastern investors for something bigger, a plan to divert the entire Eagle Creek watershed for large-scale mining operations. If he succeeds, he'll control every drop of water in 3 counties. That would destroy every ranch, every farm, every settlement downstream," Ellie realized, thinking of the Navajo community that depended on Eagle Creek. "Exactly. Thousands of people would be forced out, their lands worthless without water." Parker's expression hardened. "And Blackwood's friends in the territorial government are helping him rewrite water laws to make it all legal." Ellie paced the small room, her mind racing. This wasn't just about saving her ranch anymore. It was about stopping a scheme that would devastate the entire region. "Why are you really here, Marshal?" she asked abruptly. "And don't tell me it's just because you heard a Callahan was in trouble." Parker studied her for a long moment before answering. "Because Victor Blackwood murdered my brother," he said finally. 3 years ago, when I was still riding with the Garrett gang. Tom was a surveyor for the territorial office. He discovered Blackwood's plans and tried to expose them. They found him with his throat cut, his reports missing." The pieces clicked into place for Ellie. "So you became a marshal to get close to Blackwood?" "To bring him to justice," Parker corrected. "Legal justice, though God knows I've been tempted otherwise." A heavy silence fell between them, broken only by the distant howl of a coyote. 2 people from opposite sides of the law, united by loss and a common enemy. "My father taught me something," Ellie said finally. "He said the most dangerous enemies aren't the ones who come at you with guns blazing. They're the ones who change the rules of the game while making you think you're still playing by the old ones." Parker nodded slowly. "Blackwood's been changing the rules for years, buying judges, rewriting laws, making his corruption look legitimate." "Then maybe it's time someone changed the rules on him," Ellie suggested, a plan already forming in her mind. Before Parker could respond, the sound of approaching horses shattered the night's stillness. Not the orderly approach of Blackwood's men, but the reckless gallop of someone in a hurry. Parker's hand moved to his gun as Ellie extinguished the lamp, plunging the room into darkness. From the window, she could make out a single rider pushing his horse hard toward the ranch house. "It's Danny," she recognized with alarm, hurrying outside. The boy nearly fell from his exhausted horse, his face streaked with blood and dirt. "Mrs. Walsh," he gasped. "They took Javier." "Who took him?" Ellie demanded, helping the boy to his feet. "Blackwood's men?" Danny nodded frantically. "We were checking the north fence line. Riders came out of nowhere, at least 6 of them. Javier told me to run, to warn you." His voice broke. "I heard gunshots as I rode away." Parker emerged from the house, his expression grim. "Blackwood's moving faster than I expected. Taking your foreman is a message. They're done waiting." A cold fury settled over Ellie, reminiscent of the feeling she'd known riding alongside her father years ago. But this was different, sharper, more personal. "They've made their first mistake," she said quietly. "They've taken someone under my protection." Parker studied her with new respect, recognizing the steel beneath her composed exterior. "If they're holding him at Blackwood's mining camp, a direct approach would be suicide. The place is fortified like a military outpost." "I'm not planning to knock on the front door," Ellie replied. "Danny, can you ride?" The boy straightened, wiping blood from a cut above his eye. "Yes, Mom. I need you to get to Hawk's trading post. Tell him what's happened and to spread the word to everyone downstream from Eagle Creek. Blackwood's planning to dam the entire watershed." As Danny mounted a fresh horse, Ellie turned to Parker. "You know Blackwood's operation. How well do you know the old mine tunnels beneath his camp?" A slow smile spread across Parker's face, the smile of a predator sensing advantage. "Better than Blackwood himself, I'd wager. Those tunnels were Ghost Rider territory before I ever wore a badge." Ellie nodded, a plan crystallizing in her mind. "Then we have work to do." As Danny galloped into the night, Ellie and Parker began preparing for what would come next. Blackwood and his men thought they were dealing with a vulnerable widow they could intimidate and outgun. They were about to discover they'd awakened something far more dangerous, a woman who had learned strategy and survival from the most feared bounty hunter in the territories. The daughter of Mad Mick Callahan was going to war, and this time she wasn't fighting just for herself. She was fighting for every person whose life and livelihood depended on the waters of Eagle Creek. Blackwood had changed the rules, thinking it gave him the advantage. He didn't realize that Eleanor Walsh had been raised to see opportunities where others saw only impossibilities, to turn an enemy's strength into their greatest weakness. As she checked her father's colt one final time, Ellie felt a grim certainty settle over her. By revealing her true identity, she'd made herself a target. But she'd also reminded herself of who she really was beneath the years of peaceful ranching life. Red Callahan had returned to Cottonwood Valley, and before this was over, Victor Blackwood would learn why that name had once made even the most hardened outlaws think twice about crossing her path. The darkness clung to Cottonwood Valley like a shroud as Ellie and Marshall Parker made their way toward Blackwood's mining camp. They moved with practiced stealth, following game trails that wound through the rugged landscape, paths that didn't appear on any official maps, but that Ellie had memorized years ago under her father's tutelage. Every shadow, every sound, every shift in the night breeze registered in her heightened senses as they approached the southern rim overlooking the camp. "Hold," Parker whispered, raising his hand. They crouched behind a granite outcropping, and the marshal produced a brass spyglass. From his saddlebag, in the valley below, Blackwood's operations sprawled across what had once been pristine grazing land. The main compound was ringed with torches, armed men patrolling its perimeter with military precision. Beyond that stood the mining infrastructure, ore, processing buildings, equipment sheds, and the yawning mouth of the main shaft cut into the hillside. "There!" Ellie pointed to a smaller structure set apart from the others. "That's where they'd keep prisoners." Parker studied it through his spyglass. 2 guards at the door, probably more inside. He hesitated. "They'll be expecting some kind of rescue attempt. They'll be expecting a frontal assault," Ellie corrected. "They don't know about the old tunnels." The marshal lowered his spyglass, his expression troubled. "Those tunnels haven't been used in years. They could be collapsed, flooded." "There's a water table beneath this entire valley," Ellie interrupted. "My father mapped every underground stream and cavern when I was a child. Trust me, the Navajo passages will still be open." Parker's eyebrows rose. "Your father was thorough. He believed knowledge was more valuable than bullets," Ellie replied. "He taught me that controlling territory wasn't just about having the most guns. It was about understanding what others didn't." She took the spyglass, studying the camp's layout with practiced efficiency. "See those water tanks? They're positioned above the main shaft. Blackwood's entire operation depends on controlling that water supply. And if someone were to redirect that water..." Parker began, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Exactly," Ellie confirmed. "But first, we need to find Javier." They retreated from the ridge, following a narrow ravine that wound around the southeastern edge of the mining camp. The entrance to the old tunnel network was concealed beneath a rockfall that looked natural to untrained eyes. Parker helped Ellie clear away enough debris to reveal the narrow opening. "Your father really did know about these," the marshal remarked, impressed despite himself. "My father knew about everything in 3 territories that could give him an advantage," Ellie replied, lighting a small lantern. "The Navajo showed him these tunnels decades ago, before the Silver Rush. They've been using them since before white. Settlers even reached this valley." The passage descended steeply, the cool, damp air a relief after the night's dry heat. Ellie moved with surprising confidence for someone who claimed to have left this life behind 7 years ago. Parker followed close behind, noting how she checked each fork with practiced care, occasionally consulting what appeared to be mental landmarks. "How do you remember all this?" he asked after they'd been walking for nearly half an hour. "My father made me memorize these tunnels when I was 12, Ellie answered, her voice echoing softly in the narrow space. "We'd spend weeks down here mapping water sources, planning escape routes, identifying choke points where an enemy could be trapped." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "He called it my education." "Sounds like a hell of a childhood," Parker remarked. "It wasn't what most girls experienced," Ellie admitted, "but it kept us alive in a world that didn't offer second chances." They continued in silence, the tunnel occasionally widening into chambers where ancient pictographs decorated the walls, evidence of the generations who had used these passages before them. Eventually, the tunnel began to slope upward, and the distant sound of machinery grew more pronounced. "We're beneath the mining camp now," Ellie whispered, extinguishing her lantern. Ahead, a faint light filtered down through what appeared to be a ventilation shaft. "This should bring us up near the storage buildings, if my memory serves." Parker checked his revolver. "And if it doesn't, then we improvise," Ellie replied with the calm confidence of someone who had faced worse odds. "That's another thing. My father taught me, no plan survives first contact with the enemy." The shaft was narrow but navigable, with ancient handholds carved into the rock. Ellie went first, moving with silent efficiency despite the years away from this life. At the top, a crude wooden grate covered the opening. She pressed against it gently, testing its strength before nodding to Parker below. "On 3, she mouthed. 1, 2, 3. They pushed upward together, and the grate lifted with a minimal scraping sound. Ellie peered cautiously into what appeared to be a storage shed filled with mining equipment. It was empty of people. They emerged silently, replacing the grate behind them. The sounds of the mining operation were louder now. The rhythmic thud of stamp mills crushing ore, the occasional shout of workers, the steady hiss of steam engines. Ellie moved to the door, easing it open just enough to survey the compound. The detention building stood approximately 50 yards away, across an open yard illuminated by sporadically placed torches. The 2 guards remained at their post, rifles held casually but ready. "We need a distraction," Parker whispered, studying the layout. Ellie's gaze had already fixed on a structure to their right, a small building housing the steam engines that powered much of the mining equipment. "Those pressure valves," she murmured, "if they were to fail." Understanding dawned in Parker's eyes. "That would certainly draw attention." "It would do more than that," Ellie replied. "Look at how the water supply lines run from the holding tanks through the engine house, then branch out to the rest of the camp. If we redirect the main valve, we could flood the lower portions of the camp while cutting off water to the upper sections," Parker finished, an appreciative gleam in his eye, "creating chaos in multiple locations simultaneously." "Exactly." Ellie checked her father's Colt one last time. "I'll handle the valves. You position yourself closer to the detention building. When the commotion starts, the guards will either investigate or seek instructions. Either way, there'll be a window to get inside." Parker nodded, but there was hesitation in his expression. "Mrs. Walsh." Ellie, she corrected. Ellie, he amended. I've spent 3 years building a case against Blackwood. If we're caught, we won't be, she interrupted with quiet confidence. But if something goes wrong, your priority is getting Javier out. He knows this valley better than anyone except me. The people downstream will need him if Blackwood succeeds with his dam. The marshal studied her face, reading the determination beneath her composed exterior. You're not just fighting for your ranch anymore, are you? I stopped fighting just for myself the moment I learned what Blackwood really plans to do with Eagle Creek, Ellie replied. Some fights are bigger than personal vendettas. They moved separately, using the shadows between buildings for cover. Ellie reached the engine house without incident, slipping inside through a side door left ajar for ventilation. Inside, the heat was oppressive, steam hissing from countless pipes and valves that controlled the flow of water and power throughout the camp. Having grown up around her father's mechanical tinkering, Ellie quickly identified the main control valves. With systematic precision, she began adjusting them, not enough to cause an immediate catastrophic failure, but sufficient to create a cascading series of problems that would escalate rapidly. As she worked, voices approached the door. 2 men complaining about the night shift. Ellie ducked behind a large boiler, her hand moving instinctively to her revolver. The men entered, continuing their conversation as they performed what appeared to be routine checks. Blackwood's got the widow on the run now, one of them remarked, adjusting a pressure gauge. Says we'll control the entire watershed by the end of the month. Good riddance, the other replied. That scarred bitch has been a thorn in his side for too long. Heard she's really a Callahan, the first man said, his voice dropping. Mad Mick's daughter. His companion scoffed. Those are just stories to scare us. Blackwood says she's nothing, just a stubborn woman who doesn't know when she's beaten. Maybe, but Snake Eyes is taking extra precautions with the Mexican they caught. Says the widow might try something. She'd be a fool to come here. Place is locked down tight as a drum. Still, Blackwood's offering a bonus to anyone who spots her, $500, dead or alive. They completed their checks and left, still discussing the reward. Ellie emerged from her hiding place, a cold determination settling over her. The price on her head confirmed what she already suspected. Blackwood was eliminating loose ends, preparing for something imminent. She returned to the valves, making her final adjustments. Within minutes, pressure would begin building in some parts of the system while draining from others, creating a cascade of failures that would demand immediate attention from every available worker. Outside, she caught sight of Parker positioned behind a stack of timber, waiting for her signal. Ellie took a deep breath, steadying herself for what would come next. She'd spent 7 years trying to leave violence behind, building a peaceful life with John. But as she prepared to plunge Blackwood's camp into chaos, she felt a familiar clarity, the strategic focus her father had instilled in her since childhood. With one final twist of a critical valve, Ellie set the plan in motion. She slipped outside just as the first warning whistles began to sound, high-pitched alerts that something was wrong with the steam pressure. Within moments, the calm efficiency of the night shift dissolved into confused activity as workers rushed toward the engine house. Ellie circled around toward the detention building, using the growing commotion as cover. The guards at the door were already looking toward the source of the alarm, their postures tense with indecision. Then came the sound she'd been waiting for, a loud metallic groan, followed by the explosive release of a pressure valve. Seconds later, water began gushing from ruptured pipes near the main shaft. Shouts of alarm rose throughout the camp as men abandoned their posts to deal with the rapidly escalating crisis. One of the detention building guards hurried toward the commotion, leaving his partner alone. Parker seized the opportunity, approaching from behind with the silent efficiency that had once made the Ghost Rider infamous. Before the remaining Guard could react. The marshal had rendered him unconscious with a precise blow. Ellie joined Parker at the door, gun drawn. "How many inside?" "Can't tell," Parker replied, trying the handle. "Locked." Ellie knelt by the unconscious guard, searching his belt until she found a ring of keys. The third one opened the door, revealing a dimly lit interior divided into crude cells. In the farthest one, a figure sat slumped against the wall. "Javier!" Ellie rushed forward, unlocking the cell door. The foreman's face was bruised, one eye swollen shut, but he managed a weak smile of recognition. "Mrs. Walsh," he rasped, "you shouldn't have come." "You'd have done the same for me," she replied, helping him to his feet. Can you walk?" Javier nodded grimly. They wanted information about the ranch, access points, defenses. His one good eye met hers with fierce loyalty. "I told them nothing." Outside, the chaos was growing. The water diversion had worked better than anticipated. The lower mining tunnels were flooding, and fires had broken out near the processing buildings as overheated equipment failed catastrophically. "We need to move now," Parker urged, peering outside. "The tunnel entrance is too far with him injured. We'll have to find another way out." Javier leaned heavily against the wall, his breathing labored. "There's a supply wagon that leaves every night for Redemption Springs," he managed. "Should be by the north gate." Ellie nodded. It was risky, but their options were limited. "Lead the way, Marshal." They slipped from the detention building, using the spreading chaos as cover. The mining camp had descended into frantic activity. Men forming bucket brigades to fight fires, others working desperately to stem the flooding in the tunnels. No one paid attention to three figures hugging the shadows between buildings. They had almost reached the north gate when a commanding voice cut through the din. "Hold it right there." They turned to find Snake Eyes Harmon standing 20 paces away, revolver aimed squarely at them. Behind him stood two more of Blackwood's men, guns drawn. "Well, well," Harmon drawled, his distinctive squint more pronounced in the flickering torchlight. "The Widow Walsh, a U.S. Marshal, and the Mexican foreman. Mr. Blackwood will be pleased." Ellie positioned herself slightly in front of Javier, her mind racing through options. Parker stood motionless beside her, his hands carefully away from his weapon. "Quite a commotion you've caused," Harmon continued, gesturing toward the spreading chaos with his free hand. "Impressive, really. But it ends here." "Does it?" Ellie challenged, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "Look around you, Harmon. Your mining operation is falling apart. Even if you kill us, you can't stop what's happening." Something flickered in Harmon's eyes, uncertainty perhaps, or grudging respect. "You're just buying time, Mrs. Walsh, or should I say, Miss Callahan." The use of her true name confirmed what Ellie had suspected. Blackwood now knew exactly who he was dealing with. "If you know that name," she replied evenly, "then you know what happens to people who cross my family." Harmon's laugh held no humor. "Your father's not here to save you, Red, and from what I hear, he wouldn't come even if he could. Didn't approve of his daughter marrying a simple rancher, did he?" The barb struck deeper than Ellie cared to admit. Her father's disapproval of John had created a rift that 7 years hadn't healed, but she kept her expression neutral, refusing to give Harmon the satisfaction of seeing his words land. "Marshal Parker," Harmon shifted his attention. "The Ghost Rider with a badge. What would your superiors think if they knew you were breaking into private property, causing all this destruction?" "They'd probably want to know why Victor Blackwood is holding people prisoner and planning to illegally dam a watershed that thousands depend on," Parker replied coolly. Tension crackled between them, a standoff with no clear resolution. Behind Harmon, the fires were spreading, and the flooding had reached the main yard. Men were abandoning their posts, focusing solely on saving equipment and themselves. "You've lost control of your operation," Ellie observed, her tone almost conversational. "What do you think Blackwood will do when he learns you couldn't maintain order? Men like him don't tolerate failure." A flicker of something, fear perhaps, crossed Harmon's scarred face, but his aim remained steady. "On your knees, all of you. Now." None of them moved. "I won't ask again," Harmon warned, cocking his revolver. What happened next unfolded with the sudden violence of a summer storm. From the shadows behind Harmon, a massive figure emerged, a man moving with surprising stealth for his size. Before Harmon or his men could react, the newcomer had dispatched one guard with a crushing blow and seized the other's gun arm. Harmon whirled, firing once, twice, both shots going wide as the giant attacker closed the distance between them. There was a brief, brutal struggle, and then Harmon lay unconscious at the man's feet. In the flickering light of the burning camp, Ellie stared in disbelief at their unlikely savior. Though older, grayer, his face more deeply lined than she remembered, there was no mistaking the imposing figure of Michael "Mad Mick" Callahan. "Hello, little bird," he said softly, using the childhood nickname that only he had ever called her. "Seems you've stirred up quite a hornet's nest." Ellie felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet. 7 years of silence, of building, a life separate from his legacy, and now here he stood, exactly as she remembered him, yet somehow changed. "Father," she managed, her composure momentarily cracking. "Explanations later," Mick Callahan growled, already moving toward the north gate. "Right now, we need to get clear before this whole place goes up." They hurried toward the supply wagon Javier had mentioned, finding it hitched and ready near the gate. The guards who should have been watching it had abandoned their posts to help with the escalating disaster in the camp. Mick took the reins, while Parker helped Javier into the back, covering him with empty burlap sacks. Ellie climbed up beside her father, still struggling to process his sudden appearance. As they drove through the gate, uncontested in the confusion, she finally found her voice. "How did you know where to find me?" "Got your telegram this morning," he replied, his attention on navigating the dark trail. "Figured you wouldn't have sent it unless things were dire." His weathered face betrayed nothing of what it cost him to admit the next part. "Should have come years ago, little bird. Maybe your John would still be alive if I had." The simple acknowledgement of her loss, something her father had never mentioned in their limited correspondence over the years, cracked something inside Ellie. But this wasn't the time for the conversation they needed to have. Behind them, Blackwood's mining camp continued to burn, the destruction they'd triggered taking on a life of its own. "Blackwood will retaliate," she said instead. Practicality, overriding emotion, as her father had taught her. "He'll come after the ranch with everything he has." Mick Callahan's smile was grim in the darkness. "I'm counting on it." They drove in silence for several miles, putting distance between themselves and the chaos they'd left behind. Eventually, they turned off the main trail, following a narrow path that wound through dense juniper toward a hidden canyon. One of many secret places Ellie remembered from her childhood training. A small camp had been established in the shelter of a sandstone overhang, a fire burning low, horses tethered nearby, and supplies arranged with military precision. Standing guard was a face Ellie hadn't seen in years, Franklin "Hawk" Thompson, her father's longtime friend and ally. "You found her," Hawk remarked as they approached. His weathered face, framed by silver-streaked black hair, broke into a rare smile. "Little Red, all grown up." "Not so little anymore," Ellie replied, embracing the old family friend, while Parker helped Javier down from the wagon. "Danny made it to my trading post," Hawk explained, examining Javier's injuries with practiced eyes. "Told us what happened. Your father was already on his way. We just adjusted the rendezvous point." As Hawk tended to Javier's wounds using herbal remedies learned during his years with the Navajo, Mick Callahan studied Marshall Parker with undisguised suspicion. "A lawman riding with my daughter," he remarked, his tone making the word lawman sound like a slur. Times have certainly changed. "The Marshal has his own reasons for opposing Blackwood," Ellie explained, feeling the strange tension between the two men. "He's been building a case against him for years, and yet Blackwood's operation has only grown," Mick observed, his skepticism evident. Parker met the older man's gaze without flinching, something few men could manage when faced with Mad Mick Callahan's legendary stare. "Blackwood has connections in the territorial government all the way up to the governor. Building a case that can withstand that kind of influence takes time." "Time we don't have," Mick countered. "He'll move against Ellie's ranch by morning, once he realizes she was behind tonight's disaster." "We bought ourselves a few hours at most," Ellie agreed. "But we need more than just time. We need leverage. Blackwood's too powerful to fight directly." Her father's eyes gleamed with approval. "Now you're thinking like a Callahan again. It's not about who has the most guns, it's about who holds the key pieces of knowledge." He turned to Hawk. "Show them what Danny brought." Hawk retrieved a weathered leather satchel from among their supplies. From it, he produced several documents, maps, legal papers, and what appeared to be private correspondence. "Danny didn't just bring news," Hawk explained. "He brought these, found them hidden in your husband's study behind a loose wall panel." Ellie took the papers with trembling hands. She'd never known John to keep secrets from her, certainly nothing important, enough to conceal in a hidden compartment. As she examined the documents, understanding dawned. The maps showed detailed surveys of the underground water system throughout Cottonwood Valley, far more comprehensive than anything she'd seen before, even from her father. The legal papers were copies of original land grants dating back to the first settlements, with careful annotations about water rights provisions that had been systematically omitted from territorial records. But it was the correspondence that truly shocked her. Letters between John and a territorial investigator, documenting years of evidence against Blackwood's operation. Her husband had been building a case long before his death, gathering proof of corruption, bribery, and even murder. "John never told me," she whispered, the revelation of her husband's secret work hitting her like a physical blow. "He was protecting you," her father said, unexpected gentleness in his voice. "The less you knew, the safer you were." "Until Blackwood discovered what he was doing," Parker added grimly, examining one of the letters. "This last one is dated 3 days before the fire." The implication was unmistakable. John hadn't died in an accident. He'd been silenced, and the fire hadn't been meant just to clear the way for Blackwood to acquire the ranch. It had been intended to destroy this evidence. Why did he hide them in the house? Ellie wondered aloud. If Blackwood's men started the fire, they weren't looking for papers, Mick surmised. They were looking for this. He held up what appeared to be a small journal that had been hidden among the documents. "Your husband's personal record of every conversation, every meeting, every transaction involving Blackwood and territorial officials." He handed it to Parker. "Names, dates, amounts paid, enough to hang Blackwood 10 times over." The marshal's eyes widened as he paged through the journal. "This is extraordinary. Not just evidence against Blackwood, but proof of corruption. Throughout the territorial government, the governor, judges, land commissioners, they're all implicated. That's why they had to silence John," Ellie realized, grief and rage mingling in her chest. "Not just to get our ranch, but to keep this from ever becoming public. And now we have it," her father said, the strategist in him already calculating advantages. "This changes everything." As the others discussed the implications of John's hidden evidence, Ellie stepped away from the fire, needing a moment to process this new dimension of her loss. Her husband hadn't just been a simple rancher as she'd believed. He'd been fighting his own war against Blackwood. one that had ultimately cost him his life. She found herself at the edge of the canyon, staring out at the star-filled desert sky. So much had changed in the span of a single day. She had reclaimed parts of herself she thought long buried, reunited with her father after 7 years of silence, and discovered her husband had been keeping secrets that might have saved his life had he shared them. The sound of approaching footsteps alerted her to her father's presence. Mick Callahan moved quietly for such a large man, another skill that had served him well during his years hunting outlaws. "He loved you, you know," he said without preamble, coming to stand beside her. "You're John. I could see it in his eyes the one time we met." Ellie glanced at her father, surprised. "You met John? When?" "About a year before he died," Mick admitted. "He came looking for me in Tucson, wanted my help with his investigation into Blackwood." A shadow passed over his weathered features. "I turned him down, told him it wasn't my fight." The revelation stung, but Ellie understood. Her father had spent his life choosing his battles carefully, never engaging unless he saw a clear path to victory. "Why didn't he tell me?" "He said you'd left that life behind, that you deserved the peace you'd found." Mick's voice roughened. "He was trying to protect you from exactly what's happening now, being dragged back into a world you walked away from." The irony wasn't lost on Ellie. John had kept secrets to shield her from her past, while she had kept aspects of her own history from him, believing he wouldn't understand the person she had been before becoming his wife. "I should have helped him," Mick continued, regret evident in his tone. "Maybe things would have turned out differently." Ellie had never seen her father express remorse for anything. The man who had taught her that sentimentality was a weakness, that looking backward only slowed you down, was now acknowledging a mistake that couldn't be undone. "What matters now is what we do with what John discovered," she said finally, practical despite her emotional turmoil. "Blackwood will be coming for us, for the ranch, for this evidence." Mick nodded, seemingly relieved to return to strategic considerations. "We can't fight him directly. He has too many men, too many resources, but we can use what your husband found to undermine his position." "The journal alone isn't enough," Ellie reasoned. "Blackwood's connections could still protect him, claim. The evidence is fabricated, which is why we need to force him to overplay his hand," her father concluded, the familiar gleam of strategic calculation returning to his eyes. "Make him take actions that can't be hidden or explained away." As they talked, a plan began to take shape between them. Not the direct confrontation Blackwood would be expecting, but something more subtle, more devastatingly effective. The daughter of Mad Mick Callahan and the legendary bounty hunter himself, thinking 3 moves ahead, seeing patterns and weaknesses that others would miss. They returned to the fire where Parker, Hawk, and a now bandaged Javier were examining the maps from John's hidden cache. "These water tunnels," Parker was saying, tracing a blue line that ran beneath Blackwood's mining claim. "They connect to the main aquifer that feeds Eagle Creek, and to the underground river beneath my ranch," Ellie added, joining them, "the same one we used to flood parts of the mining camp tonight." Javier, despite his injuries, pointed to a specific junction on the map. "This is where Blackwood is planning to build his dam, where 3 tributary streams converge before forming Eagle Creek proper." "If he blocks that convergence point," Hawk observed grimly, "he controls every drop of water for 50 miles in all directions. And that's exactly why we're going to let him think he's winning," Ellie announced, the outline of their strategy now clear in her mind. All eyes turned to her. "Let him think he's winning?" Parker echoed skeptically. "The man tried to kill you, burned your house, kidnapped your foreman, and now he's coming for my ranch with everything he has," Ellie finished, "which is precisely what we want him to do." Her father's approving nod confirmed they were of one mind. Blackwood needs to be caught in the act, not just implicated in documents that could be disputed, but observed committing crimes that even his political allies couldn't ignore. You're talking about setting a trap, Parker realized. We're talking about giving him exactly what he wants, Ellie corrected, in a way that ensures his destruction. As the night deepened around their hidden camp, Ellie laid out the bones of their strategy. It wasn't just about saving her ranch anymore, or even about avenging John's death. It was about stopping Blackwood's entire operation, exposing the corruption that had allowed him to terrorize the region with impunity, and ensuring that the waters of Eagle Creek continued to flow freely for all who depended on them. They worked through the night, refining their plan, identifying potential weaknesses, preparing for contingencies. It was a complex strategy that required precise timing and coordination, exactly the kind of challenge that had once defined Ellie's life, before she became Eleanor Walsh, rancher's wife. As dawn approached, casting the first pale light over the canyon walls, Ellie felt a strange sense of reconciliation between her past and present selves. The strategic thinking her father had instilled in her, the careful observation of how power truly flowed through human systems. These weren't just skills for a bounty hunter's daughter. They were tools that could be used to protect what mattered: her land, her people, justice itself. "It's still your fight, little bird," her father said quietly as they prepared to return to Willow Creek Ranch. "But this time, you're not facing it alone." Ellie touched the scarred side of her face, a permanent reminder of all she had lost. But as she looked at the allies gathered around her, her father, the marshal with an outlaw's past, the loyal foreman, the Navajo trader, she recognized something else. Strength gathered from unexpected sources, connections that transcended the boundaries she had drawn around her life. Eleanor Walsh was no longer hiding from who she had been or who she needed to become. Like the hidden waters beneath Cottonwood Valley, her true strength had always been there, flowing beneath the surface, waiting for the moment when it would be needed most. That moment had arrived, and with it, a reckoning that Victor Blackwood and his allies could never have anticipated. The scarred widow wasn't running anymore, she was hunting. Dawn painted Willow Creek Ranch in delicate shades of amber and gold as Ellie surveyed her property from the ridge overlooking the main house. In the early morning light, the place looked peaceful, deceptively so, given what was coming. She had positioned lookouts at strategic points throughout the valley. Danny at Eagle's Pass with instructions to signal at the first sign of riders. Hawk near the old crossroads where he could monitor the main approach from Redemption Springs. And one of Javier's cousins watching the seldom-used trail from the north. "Blackwood's men will come from multiple directions," Mick Callahan observed, joining his daughter at her vantage point. "Standard encirclement tactic." Ellie nodded, her mind already 3 steps ahead. "That's exactly what I'm counting on. The more spread out they are, the harder it will be for them to maintain communication. And communication is the key to everything," her father agreed, a hint of pride in his voice. They had spent the pre-dawn hours making preparations, not fortifying the ranch as Blackwood would expect, but setting the stage for something far more subtle. Marshal Parker and Javier had ridden ahead to make final arrangements in town, while Ellie and her father had focused on the ranch itself. "He'll send Snake Eyes with his main force," Ellie continued, thinking aloud. "But Blackwood himself will stay back until he believes it's safe, probably at the ridge above Eagle's Pass, where he can observe without exposing himself." "Smart," Mick commented, "which means we need to manage what he sees." Ellie's hand, unconsciously, touched the scarred side of her face, a habit she'd developed over the years when deep in thought. "He needs to believe we're overwhelmed, retreating, giving him exactly what he wants, while we're actually documenting every move he makes," Ellie finished. building a case so irrefutable that even the governor can't ignore it. They descended from the ridge toward the ranch house, where Martha Winters was preparing supplies. The shopkeeper had arrived before first light, bringing not just provisions, but crucial information from town. "Sheriff Porter's deputized 20 men," Martha reported, her hands busy packing bandages and medicines into a field kit. "Calling it a militia to restore order. Says you're harboring fugitives and impeding legitimate business." "As expected," Ellie replied calmly. "What about Judge Wilson? Arrived on the morning stage. He's already issued warrants for your arrest and your father's." Martha's weathered face creased with worry. "They're building a legal framework to justify whatever they're planning." "Perfect," Mick said, surprising Martha with his satisfaction. "They're creating an official record of their own corruption." Ellie nodded in agreement. "Every document they file, every false charge they create, they're giving us the evidence we need." She turned to Martha. "Did you speak with Dr. Mitchell?" "He'll be ready," Martha confirmed, "though he still doesn't know the full plan. Are you sure we can trust him?" "Thomas Mitchell patched up my father more times than I can count," Ellie assured her. "He understands what's at stake." A signal. Mirror flashed from the direction of Eagle's Pass, Danny's warning that riders were approaching from the east. Almost simultaneously, a plume of smoke rose from the crossroads, Hawk's indication that another group was coming from the direction of town. "Right on schedule," Ellie observed, checking her father's pocket watch. "They want to arrive simultaneously, prevent us from focusing our defense in any one direction. But we're not planning to defend," Mick reminded her, a wolfish smile crossing his weathered features. "We're planning to lose, but on our terms." Martha looked between father and daughter, anxiety evident in her expression. "I still don't understand how letting them take the ranch helps us defeat Blackwood." "Because the ranch isn't what matters," Ellie explained, buckling on her gun belt. "What matters is forcing Blackwood to reveal his true intentions in a way that can't be denied or covered up." They moved with practiced efficiency, each taking their assigned positions. Martha retreated to the storm cellar with the document cache, John's journal, and the other evidence they'd recovered. Mick took a position in the barn loft, where he had clear sight lines to all approaches. Ellie remained visible on the porch, the Winchester rifle prominent in her hands, playing the role of a determined but outnumbered defender. The first riders emerged from the tree line to the east, at least a dozen men led by Snake Eyes Harmon. Almost simultaneously, another group appeared from the direction of Redemption Springs, the silver star of Sheriff Porter visible on the lead rider's chest. Together, they formed an imposing force of nearly 30 armed men surrounding the modest ranch. "Eleanor Walsh!" Porter's voice carried across the yard, the artificial authority in his tone betraying his discomfort with the role he was playing. "By the authority of the territorial court, I have warrants for your arrest on charges of sabotage, destruction of property, and water rights violations." Ellie stepped forward, her posture conveying defiance rather than fear. "Interesting timing, Sheriff, especially since Judge Wilson only arrived in town this morning." Her voice carried clearly to the assembled men. "How long did it take Blackwood to purchase those warrants, or did he have them prepared in advance?" Porter's face reddened, but it was Snake Eyes who spurred his horse forward. The scars on his face seemed more pronounced in the morning light, his expression a mixture of anger and grudging respect. "You caused quite a bit of damage last night, Mrs. Walsh," he called. "Mr. Blackwood is not pleased." "I imagine not," Ellie replied evenly. "Flooding tends to reveal things that were meant to stay hidden, like the fact that his mining operation was illegally diverting water from Eagle Creek long before he filed any claims." A murmur ran through some of the deputized men, locals, who depended on the creek for their own small farms and ranches. Ellie noted the reaction, recognizing the first crack in the united front Blackwood had assembled. Snake Eyes noticed it too. his eyes narrowing as he surveyed his troops. "This isn't about water rights anymore, Mrs. Walsh. This is about the law." He gestured toward Sheriff Porter. "You're facing serious charges. Surrender now, and Mr. Blackwood might be persuaded to show leniency." "Might he?" Ellie's tone made the question sound like a challenge. "Just like he showed leniency to my husband? To the Navajo settlement downstream? To every rancher in this valley who refused to sell?" Another ripple of unease moved through the assembled men. Many were locals who had witnessed Blackwood's methods firsthand, who had seen neighbors driven out through increasingly aggressive tactics. "That's enough!" Porter interjected, trying to regain control of the situation. "Mrs. Walsh, we have legal warrants for your arrest and authority to search these premises for stolen documents and harbored fugitives. Will you comply, or must we use force?" Ellie's gaze swept over the assembled men, noting their positions, their level of commitment, the subtle signs of doubt in some faces. She recognized the strategic moment her father had taught her to identify, when an opponent's seemingly overwhelming force could be turned against itself. "I won't resist the law, Sheriff," she announced, her voice carrying to every man present. "But I want every person here to understand what they're participating in." She pointed toward the ridge, where a solitary figure on horseback observed the proceedings. "Victor Blackwood isn't interested in justice or water rights or legal claims. He wants this land because it controls access to the entire watershed. Once he dams Eagle Creek, every farm, every ranch, every settlement downstream will wither and die." The effect of her words was visible. More uncertainty, more exchanged glances among the deputized locals. Snake Eyes recognized the danger, spurring his horse forward. "Enough talk! Sheriff, serve your warrants." Porter dismounted, approaching the porch with visible reluctance. Ellie set her rifle aside, showing empty hands as the sheriff climbed the steps. "You know this isn't right, William," she said quietly, using the sheriff's first name. "You've lived in this valley your whole life. Your family's ranch depends on the same water Blackwood plans to divert." A flicker of something, shame perhaps, crossed Porter's face. "I don't have a choice, Eleanor. None of us do anymore. Blackwood owns the territorial office, the courts, even the governor. Fighting him is suicide." "Only if you fight alone," Ellie countered. Then, louder, ensuring her voice, carried to the assembled men. "I'm not resisting arrest, Sheriff, but I want everyone present to witness that I'm surrendering under protest, maintaining that these charges are fabricated at the direction of Victor Blackwood." As Porter reluctantly bound her wrists, a commotion erupted at the edge of the property. Through the trees came a group of riders, not Blackwood's men, but members of the Navajo settlement, led by Javier's cousin Carlos. Behind them rode Marshal Parker, his badge prominently displayed. "Hold!" Parker's authoritative voice cut through the tension. "Sheriff Porter, what exactly is happening here?" Porter turned, his discomfort increasing visibly. "Serving legal warrants, Marshal. This is a territorial matter, not federal." Parker dismounted, approaching with purposeful strides. "Interesting. Because I've received reports of armed men massing to seize water rights by force, which, as you know, would violate federal statutes protecting native water access." He gestured toward Carlos and the other Navajo riders. "The Eagle Creek watershed serves a federally recognized settlement. Any attempt to disrupt that water supply falls under federal jurisdiction." Snake Eyes' face darkened with anger. "We're enforcing legitimate territorial warrants, Marshal. You have no authority here." "Actually," Parker countered, producing documents from his coat, "I have explicit authorization from the federal court in Santa Fe to investigate reports of water rights violations affecting native lands." He turned to Porter. "May I see these warrants you're serving, Sheriff?" The standoff crackled with tension as Porter reluctantly handed over the papers. Parker reviewed them with deliberate thoroughness. his expression growing increasingly troubled. "These warrants are dated yesterday," he noted, "but Judge Wilson only arrived in Redemption Springs this morning. Furthermore, they cite violations of statutes that directly contradict federal water rights protections." He looked up, addressing the assembled men. "Any man participating in actions based on these fraudulent warrants could face federal charges." The impact was immediate. Several of the deputized locals began to back away, no longer certain of the legal ground they stood on. Snake Eyes recognized the situation slipping from his control. "Mr. Blackwood's attorneys have confirmed the legality of our actions," he insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. "Then Mr. Blackwood's attorneys can explain that to a federal judge," Parker replied. Evenly, he turned to Porter. "Sheriff, I suggest you release Mrs. Walsh and withdraw your men before this situation escalates into a jurisdictional conflict you cannot win." For a moment, Porter wavered, caught between Blackwood's demands and the federal authority Parker represented. But before he could respond, a new voice entered the confrontation. "That won't be necessary, Marshal." Victor Blackwood himself rode into the yard, accompanied by two men in expensive suits, his legal advisors presumably. Unlike his hired guns, Blackwood presented a picture of refined authority in his tailored clothes and polished manner. Only the coldness in his eyes betrayed the ruthlessness that had built his empire. "Mrs. Walsh and I have a private matter to resolve," Blackwood continued, his tone reasonable, even cordial. "These unfortunate legal proceedings could be avoided entirely if we could come to a mutual understanding about her property." Ellie met his gaze steadily, showing none of the strategic calculations running through her mind. This was the moment they had been engineering, bringing Blackwood himself into direct involvement, forcing him to take personal responsibility for actions he usually delegated to others. "What kind of understanding?" she asked, allowing a hint of weariness to enter her voice as though considering capitulation. Blackwood smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. "A generous one. Despite the damage you've caused to my mining operation, I'm still prepared to offer fair compensation for your land. Say $7,000, well above market value given the condition of your property." "And the water rights?" Ellie pressed, continuing to play her role. "Would naturally transfer with the land," Blackwood replied smoothly. "Though they've become something of a legal question now, given the Territorial Survey's recent findings." Parker stepped forward. "Any transfer of water rights would still need to account for federal protections of the Navajo settlement's access." Blackwood's smile tightened fractionally. "Of course, Marshal. My company has always respected legitimate water claims." The emphasis on legitimate made his meaning clear. He considered the Navajo rights as negotiable as any other obstacle in his path. Ellie allowed her shoulders to slump slightly, projecting the image of a woman running out of options. "If I were to consider your offer, Mr. Blackwood, what assurances would I have that the charges against me would be dropped?" Hope flickered in Blackwood's expression, the first genuine emotion he'd shown. "I have considerable influence with Judge Wilson. I'm confident any misunderstandings could be resolved once our business matters are settled." "And my father? The Marshal, my foreman, would they also be cleared of any charges?" Blackwood's gaze sharpened, his attention suddenly focused entirely on Ellie. The casual reference to her father, confirming the rumors about her true identity, clearly intrigued him. "Your father's reputation precedes him, Mrs. Walsh. Or should I say, Miss Callahan?" Blackwood studied her with new interest. "Mad Mick Callahan's daughter, hiding in plain sight all these years. Fascinating." "Answer the question," Ellie insisted, maintaining her facade of a woman seeking terms rather than setting a trap. Blackwood made a dismissive gesture. "Any reasonable accommodation could be arranged, assuming we reach an agreement about the property." His tone hardened slightly. "Though I should note that my offer is time-sensitive. Legal proceedings have a way of becoming complicated once they're set in motion. The threat was clear, but Ellie had expected nothing less. She allowed herself to appear conflicted, buying time while the pieces of their strategy continued to fall into place. "I would need time to consider such an important decision," she said finally. "And I'd want the terms in writing, reviewed by my own legal representation." Irritation flickered briefly across Blackwood's composed features. "Time is a luxury you don't have, Mrs. Walsh. My offer expires at sundown today. After that, the territorial court takes possession of this property pending resolution of the charges against you." He gestured toward his legal advisors. "My attorneys can prepare the necessary documents immediately. You could be free of this burden by noon." From his position on the porch, Marshal Parker watched the exchange with growing concern that wasn't entirely feigned. "Mrs. Walsh, I must advise you that any agreement signed under duress—" "This is hardly duress, Marshal," Blackwood interrupted smoothly. "I'm offering a generous solution to Mrs. Walsh's legal difficulties. One might even call it charitable, given the circumstances." The standoff continued, tension hanging in the air like the promise of a storm. Around them, the assembled forces waited. Blackwood's hired guns, the increasingly uncertain deputies, the Navajo observers, all watching to see which way power would flow in this confrontation. Ellie knew that every moment of this interaction was critical, not just for her immediate safety, but for the larger strategy they had set in motion. Blackwood needed to believe he was winning, that his pressure was forcing her capitulation. "I'll need to review the documents," she said finally, projecting reluctant acceptance, "and discuss terms with Marshal Parker, as there are federal considerations regarding the water rights." Relief spread across Blackwood's features, quickly masked, but unmistakable. He believed he had won, that the scarred widow had finally recognized the futility of resistance. "A wise decision," he commended, gesturing to his attorneys. "Harrison, Wilcox, prepare the transfer documents immediately. We'll conclude this business today." He turned to Snake Eyes. "Secure the property. Ensure Mrs. Walsh has the privacy. She needs to consider her decision carefully." The coded instruction was clear to everyone present. Maintain the pressure, keep her isolated from potential allies. Snake Eyes nodded, already directing his men to establish a perimeter around the ranch house. As Blackwood's attorneys set up an impromptu office on the porch, Ellie caught Parker's eye, a silent communication passing between them. The marshal gave an almost imperceptible nod before mounting his horse. "I'll return by noon with the federal documentation regarding water rights," he announced loudly enough for all to hear. "Any transfer agreement will need to account for those provisions." Blackwood's smile remained fixed. "Of course, Marshal. We want everything properly documented." As Parker rode away with the Navajo contingent, Ellie permitted herself to be escorted into her own home, Sheriff Porter removing her restraints with obvious discomfort. Blackwood followed, his manner now solicitous, a businessman closing a difficult but satisfactory deal. "You're making the right choice, Mrs. Walsh," he assured her, seating himself at her kitchen table as though he already owned the property. "Fighting the inevitable only leads to unnecessary suffering." "Like my husband's suffering?" Ellie asked quietly, the direct question catching Blackwood off guard. A momentary flash of something, guilt, annoyance at being confronted, crossed his face before his mask of civility returned. "Your husband's death was a tragic accident, Mrs. Walsh. One that need not have happened had he been more reasonable about his options." The admission, veiled as it was, sent a surge of cold fury through Ellie's veins, but she maintained her composure, allowing Blackwood to see only what she wanted him to see, a woman resigned to her fate, outmaneuvered and overpowered. "I'll need time to gather my personal belongings," she said, her tone deliberately subdued, "and make arrangements for my ranch hands." "Naturally," Blackwood agreed magnanimously. Once the papers are signed, you can have until tomorrow morning to vacate the property. His voice hardened slightly. Though I must insist that nothing of value be removed. The sale price includes all equipment, livestock and structures. Outside, Blackwood's men were already conducting a thorough search of the outbuildings, looking for the evidence John had gathered, Ellie presumed. What they didn't know was that the most damning documents were no longer on the property, having been entrusted to Martha before the confrontation began. "I understand," Ellie replied, the picture of defeated acceptance. "Will you require anything else of me, Mr. Blackwood?" Her question contained just enough subservience to satisfy his ego, to reinforce his belief in his own victory. Blackwood rose, straightening his expensive jacket. "Just your signature, Mrs. Walsh, by sundown." He paused at the door. "Oh, and if you're wondering about your father, I have men watching all approaches to the valley. If Mad Mick Callahan makes an appearance, he'll be dealt with accordingly." The threat was delivered casually, almost as an afterthought. Blackwood clearly believed that intimidating Ellie about her father's safety would ensure her compliance. "My father and I haven't spoken in years," Ellie replied, the half-truth delivered with convincing bitterness. "He made his choices. I made mine." Satisfaction gleamed in Blackwood's eyes, another piece of leverage he thought he possessed. "Then we understand each other perfectly." After he departed, Ellie remained at the kitchen table, allowing herself to be visible through the windows as a woman contemplating difficult decisions. In reality, her mind was racing through the next phases of their plan, calculating timings and contingencies with the precision her father had drilled into her since childhood. From his hidden position in the barn loft, Mick Callahan watched the ranch yard through a carefully positioned mirror, tracking the movements of Blackwood's men as they established control of the property. Unlike his daughter, Mick's expression betrayed his true feelings. Cold calculation mixed with the anticipation of a predator who has successfully lured his prey into position. The confrontation at the ranch was unfolding exactly as they had planned. Blackwood believed he was securing his final victory, consolidating his control over the watershed that would make him the most powerful man in 3 territories. He didn't realize he was actually walking into a carefully constructed trap, one that would use his own ambition and methods against him. As noon approached, activity around the ranch intensified. Blackwood's attorneys had completed the transfer documents, laying them out on the porch table with ostentatious formality. Snake Eyes positioned his most trusted men at strategic points, maintaining the appearance of a legal proceeding while ensuring Ellie had no opportunity to reconsider or escape. Marshal Parker returned as promised, accompanied not just by Carlos and his Navajo companions, but by Dr. Thomas Mitchell from town. The doctor's presence raised eyebrows among Blackwood's men. "The marshal mentioned Mrs. Walsh was injured during this morning's confrontation," Mitchell explained, his medical bag prominent in his hand. "As the only physician in the region, I have a duty to examine her regardless of legal circumstances." Blackwood, returning from an inspection of the property boundaries, regarded the doctor with suspicion. "Mrs. Walsh seems perfectly healthy to me, doctor. Your services won't be necessary." "Actually," Ellie called from the porch, her voice carrying, "clearly, I would appreciate Dr. Mitchell's assessment. The stress of recent events has aggravated old injuries." She touched the scarred side of her face meaningfully. "I'd like to be of sound mind and body when reviewing legal documents of such importance." Blackwood hesitated, visibly calculating the potential risks against the benefit of appearing reasonable in front of witnesses. Finally, he nodded curtly. "Of course, Sheriff Porter can accompany the doctor to ensure everything remains appropriate." As Mitchell and Porter entered the house, Parker engaged Blackwood in a discussion of water rights provisions, a conversation deliberately designed to occupy the mining baron's attention Carlos and his companions remained mounted, silent observers whose presence clearly unsettled some of Blackwood's men. Inside the house, Dr. Mitchell set his medical bag on the kitchen table, opening it with practiced efficiency while Porter stood awkwardly by the door. "These burns are healing as well as can be expected," Mitchell announced loudly for Porter's benefit, examining the scarred side of Ellie's face. Then, lowering his voice to a whisper, "Everything's in place. Hawk delivered the documents to Judge Morrison in Silver City last night. The federal marshals are assembled at the territorial border, awaiting Parker's signal." Ellie nodded minutely, careful not to react visibly to this crucial update. Judge Morrison, the one territorial judge Blackwood hadn't managed to buy, was now in possession of John's evidence. The legal groundwork for Blackwood's downfall was being laid even as he believed he was securing his triumph. "The pain comes and goes," she replied at normal volume, maintaining their cover. "Worse when I'm under stress." Mitchell nodded sympathetically, removing a small bottle from his bag. "These drops will help. 2 now, 2 more at sunset." His emphasis on sunset was subtle but unmistakable, confirming the timing for the next phase of their plan. Porter shifted uncomfortably by the door. "Is there anything else, Doctor?" "Mr. Blackwood is waiting to conclude the property transfer." "Just a few more moments, Sheriff," Mitchell replied, deliberately taking his time as he bandaged a non-existent wound on Ellie's arm. "Proper medical care can't be rushed, even for legal proceedings." The delay served their purposes, giving Parker more time with Blackwood, more opportunity to cement the mining baron's conviction that his victory was inevitable. By the time Mitchell completed his examination, the sun had passed its zenith, the afternoon heat intensifying as it beat down on the ranch yard. Blackwood's impatience was visible when Ellie finally emerged onto the porch. "I trust you're feeling sufficiently recovered, Mrs. Walsh," he remarked, the politeness in his tone wearing thin. "My attorneys have prepared all the necessary documentation. Your signature will conclude our business." Ellie approached the table where the transfer papers were displayed, her movements deliberate, almost reluctant. Parker stood nearby, his expression carefully neutral, though his eyes communicated silent encouragement. "Before I sign," Ellie said, her voice steady despite the tension thrumming through her, "I need absolute clarity on one point, Mr. Blackwood." Irritation flickered across Blackwood's face. "The terms are quite clear, Mrs. Walsh. $7,000 in exchange for the property and all associated rights." "It's not the price I'm concerned about," Ellie countered. "It's your intentions for Eagle Creek once you control it. This document," she indicated the papers before her, "transfers not just my land, but water rights that affect every family downstream." Blackwood's expression hardened, his mask of civility slipping further. "My company's water usage is not your concern once the transfer is complete. It becomes everyone's concern when you're planning to dam the entire watershed," Ellie pressed, deliberately pushing him toward the admission they needed. "When you're preparing to divert water that hundreds of people depend on for survival." A ripple of unease moved through the onlookers, especially the local deputies who had families and farms in the region. Blackwood sensed the shift, his calculating gaze sweeping over the assembled witnesses. "My company has legitimate mining interests that require water access," he stated carefully. "All operations will comply with territorial regulations. Regulations that you've rewritten through your influence with corrupt officials," Ellie challenged, her voice rising just enough to carry to every person present. "Regulations that now allow you to claim priority usage over families who have worked this land for generations." Anger flashed in Blackwood's eyes, the first crack in his composed facade. "Careful, Mrs. Walsh. These accusations border on slander." "It's not slander if it's true," Ellie countered. "And the truth is that you've manipulated every system designed to protect ordinary people, courts, land officers, even law enforcement, to Build a water monopoly that will destroy communities across 3 territories. The directness of her accusation struck like a physical blow. For a moment, the yard fell silent, the tension palpable as everyone awaited Blackwood's response. When it came, it wasn't what anyone expected. Instead of denying the allegations, Blackwood laughed, a cold, dismissive sound that chilled the afternoon air. "You still don't understand how the world works, do you, Mrs. Walsh?" He gestured expansively, encompassing the ranch, the valley, the territory beyond. "This isn't about water or mining or silver. It's about power. Those who have it make the rules. Those who don't adapt or disappear." His candor was shocking even to his own men, but Blackwood seemed past caring about appearances, his frustration with Ellie's resistance finally overwhelming his caution. "Every resource in this territory will eventually belong to those with the vision and strength to control it," he continued, warming to his subject. "The water, the land, the minerals beneath, they're all just pieces in a larger game, one that you and your kind are destined to lose." Ellie held his gaze steadily, allowing him to continue his revealing monologue. This was exactly what they had been working toward. Blackwood openly admitting his true intentions, his contempt for the law, his willingness to destroy lives in pursuit of power. "My dam will redirect 90% of Eagle Creek's flow to my mining operations," he stated boldly. "Yes, that means downstream farms will wither. Yes, settlements will have to relocate. That's progress, Mrs. Walsh. The weak make way for the strong. It's the natural order of things." Marshal Parker stepped forward, his expression grave. "That's a direct violation of federal water rights protections, Mr. Blackwood. You're openly admitting to a criminal conspiracy." Blackwood's smile was cold, confident. "Federal protections mean nothing in territorial jurisdiction, Marshal, especially when the territorial government understands where its true interests lie." He turned back to Ellie. "Now, Mrs. Walsh, we've indulged your moral outrage long enough. Sign the papers or face the consequences of refusing." It was the moment they had been orchestrating since the confrontation began. Blackwood revealing his true nature, publicly admitting to crimes far beyond what even his corrupt allies could easily dismiss. And he had done it in front of witnesses from multiple communities, including federal law enforcement. Ellie picked up the pen, studying the transfer documents with deliberate care. "And if I sign, all charges against me will be dropped." "Of course," Blackwood assured her, his confidence returning as he sensed her capitulation. "I'm a man of my word, Mrs. Walsh, unlike some in your family." The barb was calculated to sting, to remind her of her estrangement from her father. Instead, it simply confirmed for Ellie that Blackwood still didn't understand who he was truly facing, a woman who had learned strategy from one of the most formidable minds in the territories. "Very well," she said softly, raising the pen. "I accept your terms, Mr. Blackwood." As Ellie prepared to sign, a single gunshot echoed across the valley, a signal from one of Blackwood's perimeter guards. All heads turned toward the sound, tension instantly ratcheting higher. "What is it?" Blackwood demanded, his hand moving toward the concealed weapon beneath his jacket. Snake Eyes hurried over, his expression tense. "Riders approaching from the north, sir. A lot of them." The strategic moment had arrived, the final phase of the plan they had set in motion. Ellie exchanged an almost imperceptible glance with Marshal Parker, both of them recognizing that the careful groundwork they had laid was about to bear fruit. "Federal marshals, most likely," Parker suggested casually. "I mentioned the situation here might require additional oversight." Anger flashed across Blackwood's face. "You had no authority to summon federal intervention, Marshal." "Actually, I had every authority," Parker countered, "especially after your public admission regarding plans that violate multiple federal statutes." Blackwood's composure cracked further, his calculating gaze darting between Ellie, Parker, and the approaching riders. For the first time, doubt entered his expression, the first indication that he sensed the trap closing around him. "Sign the papers now, Mrs. Walsh," he insisted, his tone hardening into command. "Before these complications make negotiations impossible." Ellie set down the pen, all pretense of submission vanishing from her posture. "I don't think I will, Mr. Blackwood. Not today. Not ever." The transformation was striking, from the appearance of a defeated widow to the unmistakable confidence of a woman who had been in control all along. Blackwood stared at her, finally seeing beyond the scarred face to the strategic mind that had been outmaneuvering him from the beginning. "You've lost, Mr. Blackwood," Ellie stated plainly. "Not just this ranch or these water rights, but everything you've built through corruption and intimidation." Fury replaced calculation in Blackwood's eyes. "Snake eyes," he snapped. "Secure. Mrs. Walsh and the marshal. We're leaving now." But as his men moved to comply, another signal came. This time, 3 quick shots in succession from the direction of Eagle's Pass. The sound had a visible effect on Blackwood, who recognized its significance even if he didn't understand its source. "Sir," one of his scouts called urgently, "more riders from the east. Looks like territorial rangers, and I count at least 12 men approaching from the south." Surrounded. The realization dawned on Blackwood's face like a physical blow. His carefully constructed operation was collapsing around him. The power he had wielded so confidently suddenly revealed as tenuous. "You planned this," he accused Ellie, comprehension finally dawning. "All of it. The surrender, the negotiations, even your father's absence. It was all designed to lure me here, to trap me." "Not just you," Ellie replied calmly. "Your entire operation, every corrupt judge, every bribed official, every hired gun who's terrorized this valley. Today isn't about a ranch or water rights, Mr. Blackwood, it's about justice." As the words left her lips, a commanding voice rang out from the ridge overlooking the ranch. A voice that carried the unmistakable authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "Victor Blackwood," Judge Morrison called, his judicial robes, incongruous on horseback. "By the authority of the United States Federal Court, you are ordered to surrender yourself to federal custody on charges of corruption, conspiracy, and multiple violations of territorial and federal law." Beside the judge rode Mick Callahan, who had slipped away during the confrontation to guide the federal forces into position. The legendary bounty hunter's presence sent visible shockwaves through Blackwood's men, many of whom had grown up hearing stories of Mad Mick's exploits. Blackwood's face contorted with rage as he realized the full extent of the trap. "This is territorial jurisdiction," he shouted. "You have no authority here, Morrison." "Federal crimes override territorial boundaries," the judge replied implacably. "And we have documented evidence of your criminal conspiracy affecting 3 territories and multiple federally protected communities." The net was closing, and Blackwood knew it. His gaze darted frantically, seeking any escape route, any advantage he might still possess. Finally, his eyes fixed on Ellie, standing calm and resolute before him. "This isn't over," he hissed, his hand moving toward his concealed weapon. "You think you've won, but you've just signed your death warrant, Mrs. Walsh. You and everyone who helped you." Marshal Parker stepped smoothly between them, his own weapon already drawn. "I wouldn't, Blackwood. Not with 12 federal witnesses watching your every move." For a heartbeat, the outcome hung in the balance as Blackwood weighed his options. Then Snake Eyes made the decision for him, drawing his gun with lightning, speed and firing at Parker. The courtroom in Silver City fell silent as Victor Blackwood was led in, his once immaculate suit now rumpled from days in federal custody. Gone was the confident bearing of a man who had terrorized an entire region. In its place stood a desperate figure whose empire was crumbling around him. His eyes, however, burned with the same cold calculation as he surveyed the crowded benches. Ellie sat in the front row beside Marshal Parker, whose bandaged shoulder was a reminder of how closely they had skirted disaster at Willow Creek Ranch. The confrontation that day had ended with Snake Eyes dead, shot by Mick Callahan, when the hired gun tried to create enough chaos for Blackwood to escape. 3 of Blackwood's men had also fallen in the brief but violent exchange, while Judge Morrison and the federal marshals secured the surviving members of Blackwood's operation. "All rise," called the bailiff as Judge Wilson entered. Not the corrupt territorial judge who had signed Blackwood's fraudulent warrants, but federal Judge Samuel Wilson, specially appointed to hear the case that was sending shockwaves through 3 territories. "Be seated," the judge instructed, his weathered face betraying nothing of his thoughts as he studied the crowded courtroom. "We are here to determine whether sufficient evidence exists to proceed with a full trial of Victor Blackwood on charges of corruption, conspiracy to commit fraud, illegal seizure of water rights, and accessory to murder." The last charge had been added only yesterday, after Dr. Mitchell had presented evidence linking Blackwood directly to the fire that had killed John Walsh. The medical examiner's reports, suppressed by Sheriff Porter at Blackwood's instruction, had been located in a hidden compartment of the sheriff's desk. Detailed findings indicating John had been incapacitated before the fire started. "The prosecution may present its case," Judge Wilson announced. Federal Prosecutor James Harrington rose, a tall man whose reputation for integrity had made him the natural choice for such a high-profile case. "Your Honor, the United States government intends to demonstrate that Victor Blackwood engaged in a systematic campaign of corruption and violence designed to monopolize water resources across 3 territories. His actions represent not merely violations of specific statutes, but an assault on the very foundations of law in the Western Territories." As Harrington laid out the framework of the government's case, Ellie studied the faces in the courtroom. The front row behind Blackwood was filled with his attorneys, expensive men brought in from San Francisco and Denver, their concern visible despite professional composure. Beyond them sat territorial officials whose own complicity would soon be exposed. Men who had taken Blackwood's money in exchange for looking the other way or actively enabling his schemes. On Ellie's side of the courtroom sat those who had risked everything to bring Blackwood to justice. Martha Winters, her shop temporarily closed so she could attend. Javier, still moving gingerly from his injuries, but determined to witness the proceedings. Young Danny Cooper, eyes wide at his first experience in a formal courtroom. And representatives from the Navajo settlement whose water rights had been threatened. Conspicuously absent was Mick Callahan. Despite his crucial role in Blackwood's capture, the legendary bounty hunter had declined to appear in court, preferring to remain in the shadows. "Courtrooms are for lawmen," he had told Ellie the night before, "not for men with my history." Judge Wilson studied a document handed to him by the prosecutor. "The court recognizes these copies of correspondence between the defendant and various territorial officials. Please explain their significance." "These letters, Your Honor, recovered from Mr. Blackwood's personal safe at his mining headquarters, document systematic bribery of judges, land commissioners, and law enforcement across 3 territories." Harrington held up one particularly damning example. "This communication with Judge Morris of the Western District explicitly offers $10,000 in exchange for favorable rulings on water rights cases." One of Blackwood's attorneys rose. "Objection, Your Honor. There is no proof these alleged documents were ever sent or received. They could easily be drafts or forgeries." "That objection might hold water," Harrington countered smoothly, "if we didn't also have this ledger from Judge Morris's personal accounts, showing deposits matching exactly the amounts mentioned in Mr. Blackwood's letters and occurring precisely 3 days after each ruling favorable to his interests." The systematic presentation of evidence continued throughout the morning. Financial records showing suspicious patterns of deposits to territorial officials, documented changes to water rights laws that benefited only Blackwood's operations, testimonies from ranchers who had been forced from their land through manufactured legal crises identical to what Ellie had faced. But the most damning evidence came after the midday recess, when Harrington called his key witness. The United States calls William Porter. A murmur ran through the courtroom as the former sheriff of Redemption Springs was led in, his face haggard from sleepless nights in custody. Porter had been offered leniency in exchange for his testimony, a chance to salvage something from the wreckage of his career and reputation. After being sworn in, Porter couldn't meet Ellie's gaze as Harrington began his questioning. Sheriff Porter, would you please describe your professional relationship with the defendant, Victor Blackwood? Porter swallowed hard, his voice barely audible at first. It began about 4 years ago, when Blackwood first came to Cottonwood Valley. He approached me about ensuring his mining interests received appropriate protection from the law. And what did that protection entail? At first, just looking the other way when his men intimidated local ranchers who wouldn't sell. Later, falsifying reports about accidents at farms that competed for water rights. Porter's voice strengthened as he continued, the words seeming to bring a kind of relief through confession. Eventually, he asked me to suppress evidence in criminal investigations that might implicate his operation. Like the investigation into the fire that killed John Walsh. Porter's eyes finally met Ellie's, filled with shame and regret. Yes, Blackwood's men had been watching Walsh for months. They discovered he was gathering evidence of corruption throughout the territorial system, evidence that could have destroyed Blackwood's entire operation. And what did Mr. Blackwood instruct you to do about this situation? Porter took a deep breath. He told me to ensure that any action taken against Walsh couldn't be traced back to the mining company. To make whatever happened look like an accident. Did you understand that to mean Mr. Blackwood was ordering John Walsh's death? Objection, Blackwood's attorney nearly shouted. Calls for speculation about my client's intentions. Sustained, Judge Wilson ruled. Rephrase, Mr. Harrington. The prosecutor nodded. Sheriff Porter, what actions did you take following Mr. Blackwood's instructions regarding John Walsh? I informed Snake Eyes, Samuel Harmon, about Walsh's activities and Blackwood's concerns. 2 days later, Walsh's ranch house caught fire in the middle of the night. Porter's voice cracked slightly. I was called to the scene. Mrs. Walsh had survived, badly burned. Her husband hadn't been so fortunate. And what did your initial investigation reveal? That Walsh had been struck on the head before the fire started, that the burn patterns were consistent with deliberately set blazes at multiple points in the house, that it couldn't possibly have been the accident we officially declared it to be. Yet your official report stated exactly that the fire was an accident caused by a knocked-over lantern. Harrington held up the document in question. Why the discrepancy between your findings and your report? Porter's shoulders slumped further. Blackwood made it clear that the official story needed to be an accident, that any other finding would be problematic for my continued service as sheriff. Was that a threat, Sheriff Porter? It didn't need to be explicit. I'd seen what happened to people who crossed Victor Blackwood. Throughout Porter's testimony, Blackwood remained impassive, betraying no reaction, even as the former sheriff detailed the systematic corruption that had enabled his empire to grow. Only when Porter described the deliberate targeting of John Walsh did something flicker in Blackwood's cold eyes, not remorse, but annoyance at the exposure of his methods. Ellie herself maintained a similar composure, though for different reasons. The public confirmation of what she had long suspected about John's death should have been devastating. Instead, she felt a strange sense of validation. Her husband hadn't died because of a careless accident, but because he had been fighting the same corruption she now faced in court. After Porter's testimony, the proceedings turned to financial evidence. Banking records showed how Blackwood had systematically transferred funds to territorial officials in ways designed to appear legitimate. Consulting fees, land purchases at inflated prices, investments in family businesses that never required actual business activities. "The pattern is unmistakable, Your Honor," Harrington explained, displaying a meticulously constructed timeline. "Each payment corresponds to a specific administrative decision benefiting Blackwood's water acquisition strategy. Together, they reveal not isolated incidents of corruption, but a comprehensive conspiracy to monopolize water resources across the entire region." As the afternoon wore on, Judge Wilson called for another recess. In the courtroom's antechamber, Ellie found herself standing next to Martha Winters, who had brought fresh coffee for their small group. "I never thought I'd see this day," Martha said quietly, watching through the doorway as Blackwood conferred intensely with his attorneys. "That man has ruled Cottonwood Valley through fear for so long, it seemed like he was untouchable." "No one is untouchable," Ellie replied, memories of her father's lessons surfacing. "Not when enough people decide to stand together against them." Martha studied her with newfound respect. "You planned this all along, didn't you? From the moment they threatened your ranch, you were setting up this bigger play." "Not alone," Ellie acknowledged. "It took all of us. You, Javier, Parker, my father, even John laid the groundwork years ago, gathering the evidence that made this prosecution possible." Their conversation was interrupted by Marshal Parker's approach, his expression grave despite the increasingly favorable proceedings. "Blackwood's just received a telegram," he informed them in a low voice. "His associates in the territorial capital are getting nervous. There's talk of destroying records before federal agents can secure them." Ellie's mind immediately shifted to strategic considerations. "How much time do we have?" "Not much. Judge Wilson has issued warrants, but it will take hours for marshals to reach all the relevant offices. Then we need to ensure Blackwood can't communicate with his accomplices," Ellie decided. "Every moment he sits in that courtroom is another. The moment his network can't coordinate their actions." Parker nodded in agreement. "I've already spoken with Harrington. He's going to extend today's proceedings as long as possible. Keep Blackwood where we can see him." When court resumed, the prosecution shifted focus to the environmental and human impact of Blackwood's water diversion schemes. Engineers testified about the devastation that would result from damming Eagle Creek as planned, thousands of acres rendered worthless, communities forced to relocate, generations of agricultural development undone in a matter of months. Carlos, speaking on behalf of the Navajo settlement, provided particularly moving testimony about his people's dependence on the watershed and their systematic exclusion from territorial decision-making processes that threatened their very survival. "Our ancestors have tended these waters for hundreds of years before any mining company arrived," he explained with quiet dignity. "We understand the flows, the cycles, the delicate balance that sustains all life in this valley. Mr. Blackwood's plans would destroy that balance not just for us, but for everyone." Throughout this testimony, Ellie noticed Blackwood becoming increasingly agitated, frequently passing notes to his attorneys and glancing toward the courtroom doors. His concern was obvious. The longer he remained in court, the more his carefully constructed network of corruption was exposed to federal investigation without his guidance. As the day's proceedings finally neared conclusion, Judge Wilson addressed the court. "We will continue tomorrow morning with final evidentiary presentations. Given the serious nature of the charges and the substantial evidence presented today, the defendant will remain in federal custody overnight." He fixed Blackwood with a penetrating stare. Additionally, all communication privileges are suspended until further notice due to credible concerns about witness intimidation and evidence tampering. The pronouncement visibly shook Blackwood. For the first time, genuine fear crossed his features as he realized his isolation was complete. Without the ability to communicate with his accomplices, he couldn't orchestrate the destruction of evidence or the silencing of potential witnesses. As Blackwood was led away by federal marshals, his gaze locked briefly with Ellie's. In that moment of silent confrontation, something passed between them. An acknowledgement, perhaps, that she had outmaneuvered him not through superior resources or political connections, but through a deeper understanding of how power truly flowed. Outside the courthouse, journalists from newspapers across the territories gathered, sensing the historic significance of the proceedings. The story of how a scarred widow had brought down one of the most powerful men in the West was too compelling to ignore. "Mrs. Walsh," one young reporter called out as Ellie descended the courthouse steps, "is it true you're really the daughter of Mad Mick Callahan?" The question hung in the air, forcing Ellie to confront the identity she had hidden for so long. After a moment's consideration, she answered with simple dignity. "My name is Eleanor Callahan Walsh. My father taught me to stand against those who abuse power. My husband taught me the value of building something worth protecting. Today, I honored both their legacies." The statement would appear in newspapers from Santa Fe to San Francisco, transforming the private battle for Willow Creek Ranch into a symbol of resistance against corporate corruption throughout the West. But as Ellie and her allies departed the courthouse, their focus remained on practical matters. The work wasn't finished yet. "Federal marshals are riding for the territorial capital tonight," Parker informed them as they gathered at their lodgings. "But Blackwood's network is extensive. We need to secure additional evidence before it disappears." "What about his mining headquarters?" Javier suggested. "There must be more records there that could implicate his associates." Parker nodded thoughtfully. "The facility is under federal custody, but they're focusing on the main office. If there are hidden caches elsewhere on the property..." "There are," Ellie confirmed. When Javier was being held there, he noticed Blackwood's men moving documents to a storage room near the North Tunnel entrance, somewhere they could be quickly destroyed if necessary. "We need to move quickly then," Parker decided. "I'll organize a search party." "No," Ellie interrupted. "Too obvious. Blackwood's remaining men will be watching for official movements." She turned to Javier. "Your cousin Carlos knows those tunnels better than anyone. Could he guide a small group in through the old Navajo passages we used before?" Javier nodded. "He could, but..." He gestured to his still healing injuries. "I'm not in any condition to make that journey." "I'll go," Parker volunteered immediately. "We'll both go," Ellie corrected. "I know exactly what we're looking for." The decision made, they spent the evening preparing for the covert operation. Martha would remain in Silver City to observe the continuing court proceedings, while Danny was dispatched to Willow Creek Ranch with updates for those guarding the property. As night fell over Silver City, Ellie found herself standing on the balcony of their lodging house, watching stars emerge in the desert sky. The events of recent days had transformed her in ways she was still processing, awakening capabilities long dormant, reconnecting her with a past she had tried to leave behind. "Couldn't sleep," Marshal Parker's voice came from the doorway behind her. "My grandfather showed it to Mick Callahan decades ago as payment for saving our village from raiders. Your father honored that trust by never revealing its location to others." Inside, the passage descended steeply, the air growing cooler and damper as they moved deeper underground. Unlike the mining tunnels, which were crudely functional, these ancient passages had been carefully constructed, their walls bearing faded pictographs from generations past. "How far do these tunnels extend?" Parker asked in a hushed voice. "Throughout the entire valley," Carlos replied. Though many sections have been deliberately collapsed over the years to prevent discovery, the branch we're following connects to the northern edge of Blackwood's mining operation. They walked for what seemed like hours, though Ellie's sense told her it was less than one. Finally, Carlos halted at a junction where the ancient passage intersected with a newer tunnel, part of Blackwood's mining expansion. "This is as far as I go," he whispered. "Follow this tunnel east for approximately 200 yards. It will lead you directly beneath the storage building where they've been moving documents. There's an old ventilation shaft that provides access." "You're not coming with us?" Parker asked, surprised. Carlos shook his head. "My presence in the mining camp would raise too many questions if we're discovered. Better I return to the horses and ensure your escape route remains secure." The logic was sound, though Ellie suspected there were also cultural reasons for his decision, places a Navajo man might choose not to go, spirits he preferred not to challenge. She respected his boundaries without demanding explanation. "Thank you, Carlos," she said simply. "We'll return as quickly as possible." With Carlos heading back the way they had come, Ellie and Parker continued into the mining tunnel, moving with practiced stealth. The sounds of the operation grew more pronounced as they progressed. The creak of support timbers, the distant drip of water, occasional voices echoing from above. "There," Parker whispered, pointing to a vertical shaft where moonlight filtered down through a grated opening. "That must be the ventilation access Carlos mentioned." They approached cautiously, listening for any movement above. The shaft was narrow but navigable, with metal rungs embedded in the rock wall, providing a ladder to the surface. The grate, covering the top, appeared hinged, designed to be opened from inside for maintenance. "I'll go first," Ellie decided, handing her small pack to Parker. "Cover me if there's trouble." The climb was straightforward, though the metal rungs were slick with condensation. At the top, Ellie pressed gently against the grate, relieved when it swung upward with minimal noise. She emerged into what appeared to be a storage room filled with mining equipment, picks, shovels, blasting materials, but no immediate signs of the documents they sought. After signaling Parker to join her, Ellie began a methodical search of the space, looking for anything that might conceal paperwork. The marshal emerged from the shaft moments later, closing the grate quietly behind him. "Nothing obvious," he whispered, surveying the room. "They wouldn't leave important documents in plain sight," Ellie replied, running her hands along the walls, feeling for hidden compartments or inconsistencies in the construction. "My father always taught me that the best hiding places are the ones you don't need to access regularly." Her methodical search eventually brought her to a section of flooring that sounded subtly different when tapped, a hollow space beneath ordinary-looking boards. With Parker's help, she carefully pried up the section, revealing a compartment containing several waterproof containers. "This is it," she breathed, examining the contents of the first container. Inside were ledgers documenting payments to officials not yet implicated in the investigation, territorial representatives, federal land agents, even military officers who had facilitated Blackwood's acquisition of supposedly protected lands. Parker whistled softly as he reviewed another ledger. This goes far beyond water rights. Blackwood was building a network that could control every significant resource in 3 territories: minerals, timber, transportation routes. It's all documented here, including who he paid and how much. Their discovery was potentially more significant than even John's carefully gathered evidence. These were Blackwood's own records, maintained in his own hand, impossible to dismiss as forgeries or misinterpretations. With these documents, the entire corrupt system could be exposed and dismantled. As they carefully transferred the materials into their packs, a sound from outside the storage room froze them both. Voices approaching, multiple men engaged in heated discussion. "I don't care what you heard," a gruff voice insisted. "We hold position until we get direct confirmation." Those were Snake Eye's last orders before they took him. Snake Eyes is dead, another voice countered, and Blackwood's in federal custody. There's no one left to give orders, Raven. We need to clear out the evidence and disappear before the marshals return. Ellie and Parker exchanged glances, both recognizing the immediate danger. The ventilation shaft offered their only escape. A route, but using it now would alert Blackwood's remaining men to their presence and the compromised documents. We need a distraction, Ellie whispered, her mind racing through options. Parker nodded, reaching for the blasting material stored nearby. Cover your retreat, he suggested, already preparing a small charge. I'll create enough chaos to keep them occupied, then follow. No, Ellie gripped his arm. We go together or not at all. The voices were getting closer, the door to the storage room likely to open at any moment. In that critical instant, Ellie recalled one of her father's most important lessons. Sometimes the best tactic isn't to fight or flee, but to change the nature of the confrontation entirely. Follow my lead, she whispered, hastily concealing their packs beneath some equipment before positioning herself near the door. When it swung open seconds later, Ellie didn't hide or attack. Instead, she stood calmly in plain sight, her scarred face illuminated by the lantern carried by the startled leader of Blackwood's remaining men. "Hello, Raven," she greeted him, as though her presence in the heart of his operation was the most natural thing in the world. "We need to talk." The audacity of her approach momentarily stunned the four men, giving Parker time to position himself strategically, visible but with clear access to his weapon. It was a calculated risk, but one based on Ellie's assessment of the situation. Raven recovered quickly, his hand moving toward his gun. "Mrs. Walsh, you're either very brave or very foolish to come here. I'm here to offer you a choice," Ellie replied, her voice steady despite the danger. "One your boss no longer has." Confusion flickered across Raven's weathered features. "What are you talking about?" "Blackwood will hang," she stated with quiet certainty. "The evidence against him is overwhelming, and federal authorities are moving against his entire operation as we speak. The only question remaining is who goes. Down with him." She gestured around the room. "You're here guarding evidence that implicates dozens of officials throughout 3 territories, men with power, influence, and every reason to ensure that evidence never reaches a courtroom." Understanding dawned in Raven's eyes. "You're here for the ledgers." "I'm here to give you a future," Ellie corrected. "Right now, you're facing 2 paths. Stand with a fallen employer who can no longer protect you, or cooperate with federal authorities who can offer leniency in exchange for testimony." The mercenary pragmatism in her approach resonated with men like Raven, hired guns who understood the fluid nature of loyalty in their profession. Marshal Parker, recognizing her strategy, stepped forward to reinforce it. "I have authorization to offer immunity to any of Blackwood's men who assist in securing evidence and testifying against his larger conspiracy," he stated, projecting official authority despite their compromised position. "But that offer expires the moment federal marshals arrive with warrants, which could be any time now." Raven's gaze shifted between Ellie, Parker, and his own men, visibly calculating odds and outcomes. The legendary reputation of the Callahan name likely factored into his assessment. If Mad Mick's daughter had managed to infiltrate their supposedly secure facility, what else might she be capable of? "How do I know this isn't a trick?" he demanded finally. "Because I could have simply killed you when you opened that door," Ellie replied matter-of-factly. "Instead, I'm offering you a way out that doesn't end with a federal execution." The brutal honesty of her statement cut through Raven's hesitation. With the slow deliberation of a man making a life-altering decision, he holstered his weapon and gestured for his men to do the same. "What exactly are you proposing, Mrs. Walsh?" "Help us secure the evidence Blackwood kept hidden here. Testify to what you know about his operation. In exchange, Marshal Parker will ensure your cooperation is taken into account when charges are considered. Raven considered for a long moment before nodding grimly. The ledgers are only part of it. There's more. Correspondence, maps of planned operations, contracts with officials who were supposed to regulate his activities. Show us, Parker instructed, still wary despite the apparent cooperation. What followed was a systematic revelation of Blackwood's hidden archives, not just the compartment Ellie and Parker had discovered, but multiple caches throughout the facility, carefully concealed from casual inspection. The scope of documented corruption was staggering, implicating officials from local sheriffs to territorial governors. Blackwood kept records of everything, Raven explained as they worked. Said it was his insurance policy if anyone ever turned against him. Leverage to ensure loyalty. Now it's evidence of the most extensive conspiracy we've ever documented in the territories, Parker observed, carefully packaging documents for transport. By dawn, they had secured the most crucial materials and begun the journey back through the tunnel network to where Carlos waited with the horses. Raven and two of his men accompanied them, having committed to cooperation, while the fourth had been dispatched to Silver City with a message for the federal prosecutor. As they emerged from the hidden canyon entrance into the pale light of early morning, Ellie felt a sense of completion that transcended mere victory. What had begun as a desperate defense of her ranch had evolved into something far more significant, the exposure of systematic corruption that had threatened not just her land, but an entire way of life throughout the region. The documents they carried would transform the Blackwood case from the prosecution of one powerful man into a reckoning for an entire system of exploitation and corruption. Officials who had believed themselves untouchable would face justice. Communities that had suffered under Blackwood's influence would have chance to rebuild. And Eleanor Walsh, the scarred widow who had been underestimated by everyone, except those who truly knew her, had been instrumental in making it possible. As they rode toward Silver City, the rising sun illuminating the landscape in shades of gold and amber, Ellie found herself thinking not about the past, but the future, about what would be built in the aftermath of Blackwood's fall and what role she might play in shaping it. The battle for Willow Creek Ranch had become something much larger, a turning point for an entire region standing at the crossroads between exploitation and justice. And Ellie, drawing on both her father's strategic brilliance and her husband's commitment to building rather than destroying, was uniquely positioned to ensure that what emerged from the ashes of Blackwood's empire served the many rather than the few. The scarred widow and the reformed outlaw rode side by side as dawn broke over the desert, carrying with them the evidence that would reshape the future of three territories, and perhaps in the process write a new chapter in the story of the American West itself. 3 months after Victor Blackwood's conviction, Willow Creek Ranch bloomed with new life. The summer rains had been generous, transforming the drought-stricken landscape into a canvas of green and gold. From the porch of the newly rebuilt ranch house, Ellie surveyed the changes with quiet satisfaction. Fields that had been withering now flourished, cattle grazed on recovered pasture land, and the waters of Eagle Creek flowed unimpeded through the valley. The rebuilding hadn't been easy. Blackwood's trial had revealed the full extent of his corruption, implicating dozens of territorial officials and leading to a sweeping reorganization of governance throughout the region. The federal investigation sparked by John's evidence and completed by Ellie's strategic maneuvering had exposed a network of exploitation that had threatened not just individual ranches, but the very foundation of law in the territories. "The new irrigation system is working better than expected," Javier reported, joining her on the porch. The foreman's injuries had healed, leaving only a slight limp as a reminder of his ordeal. "Carlos says even the downstream farms are seeing Improvements. Good, Ellie replied, genuine warmth in her voice. That was John's vision all along. Water management that benefits everyone, not just those with the most power. The Navajo settlement that had nearly been destroyed by Blackwood's planned dam was now partnering with neighboring ranchers on a cooperative approach to water usage, sharing resources and knowledge that benefited all communities in the watershed. It was a model that challenged the winner-takes-all mentality that had dominated territorial development for decades. A rider appeared on the horizon, approaching at an unhurried pace that suggested routine business rather than emergency. As the figure drew closer, Ellie recognized Marshal Parker's distinctive silhouette against the afternoon sky. "Looks like our marshal is paying another visit," Javier observed with a knowing smile before tactfully excusing himself to oversee the field hands. Since the conclusion of the Blackwood case, Parker's visits to Willow Creek Ranch had become increasingly frequent and less obviously connected to official business. The partnership forged in crisis had evolved into something neither of them had anticipated, a connection based on mutual respect, shared values, and an understanding of each other's complex histories. "Mrs. Walsh," Parker greeted her as he dismounted, removing his hat. The formality was a gentle tease now, a reminder of their first encounters when they had been far more cautious with each other. "Marshal," she returned with equal formality, though her eyes conveyed a warmer welcome. "To what do we owe the honor this time? More depositions for the territorial investigation?" "Actually, I bring news," he replied, joining her on the porch. "Judge Morrison has appointed the special commission we discussed. They'll be overseeing water rights administration throughout the territories with a mandate to ensure equitable access for all communities." Ellie's expression brightened at this development. After Blackwood's fall, she had advocated persistently for structural reforms that would prevent similar corruption from taking root again. The commission represented a significant victory, institutional change rather than just the removal of individual bad actors. "Who's leading it?" she asked, the strategist in her immediately focusing on the practical implications. "Thomas Mitchell has agreed to serve as chair," Parker confirmed, "with representatives from ranching communities, mining interests, and native settlements as equal partners in the decision-making process." The balanced composition was exactly what Ellie had been pushing for, a system where no single group could dominate the others, where decisions about vital resources would require consensus rather than merely reflecting who had the most money or political connections. "That's the best news I've heard in weeks," she acknowledged, "though I suspect you didn't ride all this way just to deliver an administrative update." Parker smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face. "Perceptive as always. Mrs. Walsh, the commission has a request. They want you to serve as the representative for independent ranchers." The offer caught Ellie by surprise. She had been focused on rebuilding her own operation, on transitioning from the intensity of the Blackwood confrontation back to the steady rhythms of ranch life. "Me? There are more established ranchers in the region, people who've been here for generations. None who understand both water management and the tactics used to manipulate it as thoroughly as you do," Parker countered. "None who've demonstrated your ability to build bridges between different communities." Ellie turned away, gazing out over the land that had become so deeply entwined with her identity. The request represented a choice between remaining focused on her own recovery and stepping into a role that would involve her in the region's broader transformation. "What about the ranch?" she asked, though the question was really about more than just practical management. "Javier has proven himself more than capable," Parker observed, "and the commission wouldn't require your full-time presence, just regular journeys to Silver City for meetings and occasional field assessments." Ellie smiled slightly, recognizing that Parker had anticipated her practical concerns and prepared answers. It was a trait they shared, this careful consideration of obstacles and solutions, the strategic thinking that had served them both in different ways throughout their lives. "I'll consider it," she promised, though her tone suggested she was already leaning toward acceptance. They fell into companionable silence, watching the sunset paint the valley in deepening shades of amber and gold. So much had changed in the months since Blackwood's first threats, not just in the physical landscape around them, but in Ellie herself. The scarred widow defending her land had reclaimed parts of herself long set aside, integrating Eleanor Walsh and Red Callahan into something new and stronger. "Have you heard from your father?" Parker asked, breaking the silence. Ellie nodded. "He's in Colorado now, tracking a counterfeiting ring at the request of the Denver authorities. Seems retirement doesn't suit him any better than it did before." "Some people aren't built for quiet lives," Parker observed. "They need purpose, meaningful challenges." "And what about you, Marshall?" Ellie turned to face him directly. "Have you found what you're looking for in this new life?" The question hung between them, laden with meaning beyond the immediate context. Parker considered it with characteristic thoughtfulness. "I've found that justice takes many forms," he answered finally. "As the Ghost Rider, I believed it could only be found outside the law. As a marshal, I've learned to work within the system, but also to recognize its limitations." His gaze met hers directly. "The most important lesson, though, has been about building something rather than just tearing down what's corrupt." It was a philosophy that resonated deeply with Ellie, reflecting her own evolution from her father's daughter, focused primarily on identifying and eliminating threats, to her husband's widow, committed to creating something worth protecting. "John would have appreciated that perspective," she said softly. "He was building something important here," Parker acknowledged, "something that extended beyond just this ranch. I consider it an honor to help see that vision realized." As darkness settled over Willow Creek Ranch, Ellie made her decision. The commission represented an opportunity to shape the future of the region in ways that honored both her husband's dreams and her father's principles: justice and community, protection and growth, working in balance rather than opposition. "Tell Judge Morrison I accept the position," she said firmly, "on one condition, that the Commission's authority extends to reviewing past water rights cases where corruption might have influenced outcomes." Parker smiled, clearly pleased, though not surprised by her decision. "I anticipated that request. The judge has already authorized a comprehensive review process." Their conversation continued into the evening, moving from official business to more personal reflections. The bond between them had deepened through shared struggle and aligned purpose, a partnership neither had expected, but both increasingly valued. The future stretched before Eleanor Callahan Walsh with new possibilities. The scars she carried, both visible on her face and invisible in her heart, would always be part of her story. But they no longer defined her. Instead, they marked chapters in a continuing narrative of resilience, strategic brilliance, and the courage to stand against corruption, no matter how powerful its source. As evening stars appeared in the desert sky, Ellie felt a sense of completion that transcended mere victory. What had begun as a desperate defense of her home had evolved into something far more significant. A transformation not just of her own life, but of the systems that governed an entire region. The scarred widow had not simply survived, she had changed the world around her for the better. And in that achievement, she had honored both the father who had taught her to fight and the husband who had shown her what was worth fighting for. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.